Hey friends, about 70% of folks watching my videos aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a like, leave a comment, and let me know where you're tuning in from. My name is Garrett Walsh, and I've always been drawn to the wilderness. Growing up in Flagstaff, Arizona, I was surrounded by some of the most breathtaking landscapes in the country. The towering ponderosa pines of the Coconino National Forest were my playground, and the rugged peaks of the San Francisco Mountains were constant backdrops of my childhood adventures. From an early age, my parents instilled in me a deep respect for nature. Weekends were spent hiking trails, identifying native plants, and learning survival skills. By the time I was a teenager, I could start a fire without matches, build a shelter from forest debris, and navigate using nothing but the stars and a rudimentary understanding of orienteering. As I grew older, my passion for the outdoors only intensified. I studied environmental science in college, dreaming of a career that would allow me to protect the wild spaces I love so much. After graduation, I landed a job with the Arizona Game and Fish Department, working on wildlife conservation projects. It was during this time that I met Orson. Orson Reed was a fellow conservationist a few years older than me, with a wealth of experience that I envied. We hit it off immediately, bonding over our shared love of the outdoors and our commitment to preserving it. Orson had an infectious enthusiasm about him. He was always planning the next big adventure or proposing some new conservation initiative. Over the years, Orson and I became more than just colleagues. We were friends, confidants, and hiking buddies. We spent countless weekends exploring Arizona's diverse landscapes, from the scorching deserts of the south to the alpine meadows of the north. We pushed each other to tackle more challenging trails, venture further into the backcountry, always seeking that next breathtaking vista or hidden natural wonder. Our friendship was built on a foundation of trust and shared experiences. We'd seen each other at our best and worst, exhausted after a grueling hike, exhilarated at the summit of a difficult climb, and everything in between. I thought I knew Orson as well as I knew myself, but as I sit here now, my hands shaking as I type these words, I realize how little I truly knew. How unprepared we both were for what awaited us in the depths of the Coconino National Forest. The events of that fateful hike have left an indelible mark on my psyche, forcing me to question everything I thought I knew about the natural world and my place in it. I've debated for months whether to share this story. Part of me wants to forget, to pretend it never happened and go back to my normal life. But I can shake the feeling that I have a responsibility to warn others, to shed light on the darkness that lurks in the wilderness we think we know so well. So I'll tell you about the hike that changed everything, about the bone we found, the creature we encountered, and the terror that still haunts my dreams. But first, you need to understand how it all began. With a simple idea for a weekend adventure that would push us to our limits and beyond. It was Orson who suggested the trail. He'd heard about it from a fellow hiker, a route that wasn't on any official maps. It's supposed to be incredible, he told me. Eyes shining with excitement, pristine wilderness, views you would believe, but it's not for the faint of heart. I should have known then that we were treading into dangerous territory, but the allure of unexplored paths was too strong to resist. We spent weeks planning, poring over topographical maps, assembling our gear, and preparing for every contingency we could think of. Or so we thought. As I look back now, I realize how naive we were, how confident in our abilities, how certain that our experience and preparation would be enough to handle anything the wilderness could throw at us. We had no idea that we were about to step into a nightmare that would test us in ways we never imagined. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand the full horror of what we experienced, you need to know the details of our preparation, the early stages of our hike, and the gradual buildup of unease that preceded our terrifying encounter. So let me take you back to the beginning, to the days leading up to our departure, when the world still made sense and the forest held wonder rather than terror. In the next chapter, I'll detail our preparations for the hike, the excitement and anticipation that filled us as we got ready for what we thought would be just another adventure. Little did we know that every piece of gear we packed, every decision we made, would soon play a crucial role in our fight for survival against an enemy we never saw coming. The week leading up to our hike was a flurry of activity. Orson and I met every evening after work, spreading maps across my living room floor and plotting our route. The trail we'd chosen was deep in the heart of the Coconino National Forest, far from the well-trodden paths most hikers frequented. "Look at this," Orson said one night, tracing a finger along a contour line. "If we push hard, we could make it to this ridge by sunset on the first day. The views would be incredible." I nodded, excitement building in my chest. But as I studied the map, a flicker of unease passed through me. The area we were heading into was remote with no marked trails or campsites. If something went wrong, I pushed the thought aside. We were experienced hikers. We'd done more challenging trails than this. Still, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling that we were overlooking something important. We spent hours checking and double-checking our gear. Tents, sleeping bags, water filtration systems, first aid kits. Everything was meticulously inspected and packed. I even threw in an extra flashlight and batteries just in case. The night before our departure, I found myself unable to sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts of the journey ahead. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled with dark forests and distant echoing howls. I awoke before dawn, groggy but wired with anticipation. Wilson picked me up at 5 a.m., his beat-up Jeep loaded with our packs. As we drove out of Flagstaff, the first rays of sunlight were just beginning to paint the sky. "Ready for this?" Orson asked, flashing me a grin. I nodded, pushing down the last vestiges of unease. "We're ready." Little did I know how those words would come back to haunt me. We reached the trailhead just as the sun was cresting the horizon. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. As we shouldered our packs and took our first steps onto the trail, I felt a surge of excitement. This was what I lived for, the promise of adventure, of pushing my limits and discovering new wonders. The first few hours of the hike were everything we'd hoped for. The trail wound through stands of towering ponderosas, occasionally opening up to reveal breathtaking vistas of distant mountains. We chatted easily as we walked, our conversation punctuated by the crunch of pine needles underfoot and the occasional call of a bird overhead. But as the day wore on and we ventured deeper into the forest, the atmosphere began to change subtly. The trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to create a canopy that blocked out much sunlight. The cheerful sounds of birdsong gradually faded, replaced by an oppressive silence. "Is it just me, or does something feel off?" I asked Orson during one of our rest breaks. He looked around, frowning slightly. "It's quieter than I expected, but that's probably just because we're getting into more remote territory. Animals aren't used to people out here." I nodded, trying to convince myself he was right. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle in the underbrush, every snapping twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. As afternoon faded into evening, we began to look for a suitable campsite. The ridge Orson had pointed out on the map was still a good 2 hours away, and with the light fading, we decided it was better to make camp where we were. We found a small clearing and quickly set up our tents. As I gathered firewood, I couldn't help but notice how the shadows seemed to stretch and move in unnatural ways. More than once I spun around, certain I'd seen movement out of the corner of my eye, only to find nothing there. That night, as we sat around the campfire eating our freeze-dried meals, the forest around us seemed to press in closer. The dancing flames cast weird, elongated shadows that flickered and jumped, playing tricks on my eyes. Did you hear that? I asked suddenly, sitting up straight. Olsen paused, listening intently. Hear what? I thought I heard, I don't know, like a whisper or something. He shook his head. Probably just the wind in the trees. Try to relax, Garrett. You've got a long day ahead of us tomorrow. I nodded, but sleep was long in coming that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw shadowy figures moving just beyond the firelight. And in the distance, so faint I could almost convince myself I was imagining it, I heard something that sounded like laughter, high, cold, and utterly inhuman. We broke camp early the next morning, eager to make up for lost time. The unease of the previous night had faded somewhat in the light of day, but there was still a tension in the air, the feeling that something wasn't quite right. As we hiked, I noticed that the forest was changing. The familiar ponderuses were giving way to older, gnarled trees I didn't recognize. Their bark was dark and twisted, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. The ground beneath our feet became soft and spongy, covered in a thick layer of moss that muffled our footsteps. It was nearing midday when Orson suddenly stopped short, causing me to nearly run into him. "What's wrong?" I asked. Peering around him, he pointed to something just off the trail. "What do you make of that?" I followed his gaze and felt my breath catch in my throat. There, half buried in the moss, was a bone. But not just any bone. This was massive. Easily as long as my arm and wickedly curved. Is that from a bear?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Olsen shook his head slowly. I've never seen a bear bone that big or shaped like that. We approached cautiously, both drawn and repelled by the grisly discovery. As we got closer, I could see that the bone was weathered or old. It looked fresh, as if whatever it had belonged to had died recently. "You should report this when we get back," Orson said, pulling out his camera to take a picture. "The game and fish department will want to know about it." I nodded, unable to take my eyes off the bone. Something about it filled me with a deep primal dread. Wherever this had come from, it was big, and if it was still in these woods, maybe we should turn back, I suggested, hating how shaky my voice sounded. Orson looked at me, surprise evident on his face. "Turn back? Garrett, we've barely started. We can't let one weird thing spook us." I wanted to argue, to insist that this was more than just one weird thing, but I could see the determination in Orson's eyes. He wasn't going to give up on this hike, and I couldn't let him go on alone. So he pressed on, leaving the bone behind, but its image stayed with me, burned into my mind. As we hiked deeper into the increasingly alien forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something ancient and terrible. The rest of the day passed in a blur of growing unease. The trail became harder to follow, often disappearing entirely and forcing us to navigate by map and compass. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead to create a canopy that blocked out most sunlight. What little light had filtered through seemed weak and sickly, casting everything in a pallid greenish glow. We made camp that night in a small clearing, if you could call it that. It was more of a gap between the twisted trees, barely large enough for our 2 tents. As we ate our dinner in silence, I couldn't help but feel that the forest was watching us, waiting. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with nightmares. I dreamed of massive shadowy creatures moving through the trees, of bones scattered across the forest floor, of a deep rumbling laugh that seemed to come from the earth itself. I awoke in the pre-dawn darkness, drenched in sweat and trembling, and as I lay there trying to calm my racing heart, I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. From somewhere in the darkness came a low, guttural growl, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Whatever was out there was close, and it was hungry. The growl faded, leaving behind a silence so complete that it was almost deafening. I lay frozen in my tent, hardly daring to breathe. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I heard. A bear? A mountain lion? But deep down I knew it was neither. Whatever had made that sound was something else entirely. I don't know how long I lay there, every muscle tense, straining my ears for any sign of the creature's return. Eventually, the first weak light of dawn began to filter through the tent walls. Only then did I allow myself to move, to unzip my sleeping bag with trembling hands. I crawled out of my tent to find Orson already up, crouched by the remains of our campfire. One look at his face told me he'd heard it too. What was that? I whispered, my voice hoarse with fear. Orson shook his head slowly. I don't know, but I think we should get out of here. The admission shocked me. Orson, who had been so eager to push on despite my misgivings, now looked pale and shaken. Whatever bravado had driven him before had evaporated in the face of that unearthly growl. We packed up camp in record time, our movements quick and jerky, our eyes constantly scanning the surrounding forest. As we shouldered our packs and prepared to leave, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Tracks. Massive, misshapen tracks pressed into the soft earth around our campsite. They were like nothing I'd ever seen before. Too large to be a bear, too oddly shaped to be any known predator. 5 toes, each ending in what looked like a wickedly curved claw. Orson! I called, my voice barely above a whisper. Look at this. He came over, his face draining of what little color it had left as he saw the tracks. Without a word, he grabbed my arm and pulled me onto the trail. We didn't need to discuss our plan. We both knew we had to get out of these woods as fast as possible. We set off at a grueling pace, our earlier careful hiking replaced by a desperate flight. The forest around us seemed to have changed overnight. The trees loomed closer, their branches reaching out like grasping hands. The very air felt thick and oppressive, as if the forest itself was trying to slow us down. We had been moving for maybe an hour when we heard it again. That bone-chilling growl, closer now, much closer. And this time it was accompanied by the sound of something large moving through the underbrush, branches snapping under its weight. "Run!" Orson yelled. All pretense of stealth abandoned. We took off at a dead sprint, our heavy packs bouncing painfully against our backs. I could hear it behind us, crashing through the forest with terrifying speed. Whatever this thing was, it was gaining on us. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. Through the trees, I caught a glimpse of something massive and dark, moving with a speed that defied its size. I saw a flash of teeth, a glint of claw, and then it was gone, obscured by the dense foliage. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like lead. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, the trees ahead began to thin. We bossed out of the forest onto a rocky outcropping, the ground falling away before us into a steep ravine. "There!" Orson gasped, pointing to a narrow path that wound down the cliff face. If we could make it down there, we might lose it. We had no choice. I could hear the creature crashing through the trees behind us, getting closer by the second. We started down the path, half running, half sliding down the treacherous slope. Loose rocks skidded under our feet, threatening to send us tumbling into the ravine below. My hands were soon bloody from grabbing at sharp rocks to keep my balance. That fear drove us on. The sound of pursuit spurred us to impossible speeds. We were about halfway down when I heard Orson cry out. I turned to see him lose his footing, his pack throwing him off balance. For a heart-stopping moment, he teetered on the edge of the path. Then, with a look of terror I'll never forget, he fell. I watched helplessly as Orson tumbled down the slope, bouncing off rocks and disappearing into the thick undergrowth below. I wanted to go after him to help him, but the bone-chilling roar from above reminded me of the imminent danger. With a silent apology to my friend, I continued down the path, my heart pounding so hard it might burst from my chest. I reached the bottom of the ravine and plunged into the dense forest without looking back. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, until my legs gave out and I collapsed to the forest floor, gasping for breath. Only then did I realize that the sounds of pursuit had faded. Whatever that thing was, it seemed I had finally lost it. But at what cost? Orson was gone, possibly dead, and I was alone in a forest that suddenly seemed infinitely vast and hostile. As the adrenaline faded, leaving me shaky and weak, the full horror of our situation began to sink in. What had we stumbled into? What was that creature? And how was I going to get out of these woods alive? As darkness began to fall, bringing with it a chorus of unfamiliar and terrifying sounds, I huddled at the base of a large tree, my knife clutched in my trembling hands. I knew that sleep was out of the question. All I could do was wait for dawn and pray that whatever was out there wouldn't find me before I could find my way back to civilization. Little did I know my ordeal was far from over. The night ahead would test me in ways I'd never thought possible, and the morning would bring revelations that would shake my understanding of the world to its very core. The darkness that fell over the forest was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was a living thing, pressing in on me from all sides, filled with sounds and movements that set every nerve on edge. The familiar nighttime chorus of crickets and owls was replaced by stranger, more unsettling noises, weird chittering sounds, low moans that might have been the wind but probably weren't, and occasionally that same deep rumbling growl that had first alerted us to the creature's presence. I sat with my back pressed against the rough bark of the tree, my knife clutched so tightly in my hand that my knuckles were white. Every rustle in the underbrush, every snapping twig, sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through my system. More than once I was certain I saw shapes moving in the darkness, large, misshapen things that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. As the hours crawled by, my mind began to play tricks on me. Exhaustion and fear combined to create a nightmarish fugue state where reality and hallucination blurred together. I found myself thinking of the bone we'd found, of the tracks around our campsite, of the glimpse I'd caught of the creature as it chased us. What was it? Some unknown species, a survivor from a prehistoric age? Or something else entirely, something that defied scientific explanation? And, what about Orson? The image of him falling, tumbling down that rocky slope played over and over in my mind. Was he dead, injured, or worse? Had the creature found him? The thought of my friend in the clutches of that thing was almost too much to bear. Just when I thought the night would never end, when I was on the verge of screaming just to break the maddening silence, I saw the first faint lightening of the sky through the trees. Dawn was coming. I had survived the night, but my relief was short-lived. As the forest around me slowly came into focus, I realized that nothing looked familiar. The trees here were different, older, more gnarled and twisted. The undergrowth was dense and tangled, filled with plants I didn't recognize. It was as if in my panicked flight the day before, I had stumbled into a completely different forest. I got to my feet, wincing at the stiffness in my muscles. I had lost my pack during the chase, leaving me with only the clothes on my back, my knife, and the few energy bars I'd stuffed in my pockets. No map, no compass, no water. The situation was dire, to say the least. I picked a direction at random and started walking, hoping to find some sign of civilization, a trail, a road, anything. As the dark wore on and the sun climbed higher in the sky, I began to lose hope. The forest seemed endless, each twisted tree indistinguishable from the last. The air was thick and humid, making it difficult to breathe. Strange birds called from the canopy overhead, their cries unlike anything I'd ever heard before. As I pushed through the dense undergrowth, I began to notice other unsettling details. The ground was littered with bones, some small, possibly from rodents or birds, but others disturbingly large and misshapen. I tried not to think about what kind of creature they might have come from. By midday, my throat was parched and my stomach cramped with hunger. I had rationed my energy bars, but I knew they wouldn't last long. Water was becoming a critical concern. I listened for the sound of a stream or river, but heard nothing except the eerie calls of unseen animals. It was late afternoon when I stumbled upon the clearing. At first I thought I was hallucinating. In the center of the small open space stood a structure, if you could call it that. It looked like a crowd shelter made of branches and animal hides with strange symbols painted on its walls and what looked disturbingly like dried blood. I approached cautiously, every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, but I was desperate for any sign of human presence, even if it was as bizarre and unsettling as this. As I got closer, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Hanging from the branches of the shelter were what looked like human skulls. Bleached white by the sun, I was about to turn and flee when I heard it. A low, guttural growl coming from behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, and found myself face to face with a creature that had been haunting my nightmares. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall. With its body seeming to be a nightmarish blend of bear and ape, its fur was matted and patchy, revealing leathery skin underneath. But it was the face that truly horrified me, a twisted, almost human visage with eyes that gleamed with an unsettling intelligence. For a moment we stood frozen, staring at each other. Then, with a roar that shook the very air, it charged. Down to the side, rolling through the underbrush as the creature's massive claws swept through the space where I had been standing. I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing. I knew I couldn't outrun this thing. My only hope was to somehow outsmart it. I darted towards the crude shelter, hoping to use it as cover. The creature pursued its heavy footfalls, shaking the ground. As I reached the shelter, I noticed a spear leaning against one of the supports. Without thinking, I grabbed it, spinning to face the oncoming monster. It was almost upon me, its jaws open wide, saliva dripping from yellowed fangs. In that moment, time seemed to slow. I saw every detail with crystal clarity, the matted fur, the wild eyes, the wickedly curved claws. And I acted on pure instinct. As the creature lunged, I thrust the spear forward with all my strength. The crude weapon struck home, piercing the creature's chest. It let out a deafening roar of pain and rage, thrashing wildly. I held onto the spear with all my might, driving it deeper. Hot, foul-smelling blood poured over my hands. For what felt like an eternity, we were locked in a deadly embrace. I, clinging to the spear, the creature trying to reach me with its claws. Then slowly, I felt its strength begin to fade. Its roars turned to whimpers, then to a rattling wheeze. Finally, with a shudder that ran through its entire massive frame, it collapsed. I stumbled backward, my whole body shaking. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I had faced the nightmare and somehow survived. But as the adrenaline began to fade, I realized my ordeal was far from over. I was still lost in this strange, hostile forest with no food, no water, and no idea how to get back to civilization. And worse, a terrifying thought occurred to me. What if this creature wasn't alone? What if there were more of them out there? I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the fallen creature. My mind struggled to process what had happened. It was the sound of something moving in the underbrush that finally snapped me out of my daze. Whether it was another monster or just some forest animal, I couldn't risk staying in one place. I grabbed the bloodied spear and what looked like a crude water skin from the shelter, then set off in a random direction, putting as much distance between myself and the clearing as possible. I walked for hours, pushing through dense vegetation, climbing over fallen logs, always listening for any sign of pursuit. As night began to fall, I found a relatively sheltered spot between the roots of a massive tree. I was exhausted, my muscles aching, my hands raw and bleeding from the struggle with the creature. That sleep was out of the question. Every sound, every shadow made me flinch, expecting another attack at any moment. The night passed in a haze of fear and exhaustion. When dawn finally broke, I forced myself to my feet and continued my desperate journey. I had no idea if I was heading in the right direction, but I knew I had to keep moving. It was midday when I heard it, the distant sound of running water. Hope surged through me, giving me a burst of energy. I quickened my pace following the sound. As I pushed through a thick stand of ferns, I found myself standing on the bank of a fast-flowing river. For a moment, I just stood there, overwhelmed with relief, and then I fell to my knees at the water's edge, drinking deeply. The water was cold and clean, the best thing I'd ever tasted. Once I had quenched my thirst, I studied the river. It was wide and swift, its waters churning over rocks. I knew that rivers often led to civilization. If I could follow it downstream, I might find my way out of this nightmare. I began to walk along the riverbank, the sound of rushing water a constant companion. As I walked, I tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The creature I had encountered defied explanation. Was it some unknown species, a genetic experiment gone wrong, or something even more sinister? And what about the shelter I had found? The skulls hanging from its branches suggested that whatever these creatures were, they had some level of intelligence, some sort of culture. This thought sent a chill down my spine. As the day wore on, I began to notice changes in the forest. The trees became less twisted and more familiar. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the deep woods began to lift. And then, just as the sun was beginning to set, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the distant rumble of a car engine. I broke into a run, ignoring my exhausted muscles' protests. The trees thinned, and suddenly I was standing on the edge of a road. A battered pickup truck was approaching, its headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. I waved my arms frantically, probably looking like a madman with my torn clothes and wild eyes. The truck screeched to a halt, and an older man peered out at me, his face a mix of concern and weariness. "You all right, son?" he asked. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. How could I possibly explain what had happened? How could I make anyone believe the horrors I had witnessed? In the end, I simply shook my head. "I got lost," I managed to croak out. "Can you help me get back to town?" The man nodded, gesturing for me to get in. As we drove away from the forest, I found myself looking back, half expecting to see a monstrous shape emerge from the trees. But there was nothing, just the darkening woods hiding their secrets. The days and weeks that followed were a blur. I was treated for dehydration and minor injuries at a local hospital. Search parties were sent out to look for Orson, but no trace of him was ever found. I told a sanitized version of events to the authorities, that we had gotten separated during a storm, that I had gotten lost trying to find my way back. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. Who would believe me? Even now, months later, I'm not sure I believe it myself. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear that bone-chilling growl outside my window. I've pored over cryptozoology forums, searched for any reports of similar creatures, but found nothing conclusive. I haven't set foot in a forest since that day. The thought of those dark woods, of what might be lurking in their depths, fills me with a terror I can't describe. I know that someday I'll have to face my fears to go back and search for answers. But for now, I'm content to stay in the safety of the city, where the only monsters are the ones we create ourselves. On quiet nights when the wind whispers through the trees outside my window, I can't help but wonder, what if they're out there watching and waiting? What if someday they decide to leave the forest behind and venture into our world? And what will we do when that day comes? The worst part of working in the Allegheny National Forest isn't the terrain, though it's not friendly. It isn't the cold, the long stretches of radio silence, or even the rare encounters with black bears. It's the silence. It settles in thick, crawling under your skin. And when you've been out here as long as I have, you start hearing things that shouldn't be there. It was 2003, and my name is Matt Vickers. I'd been with Search and Rescue for about 11 years, working out of Warren County, Pennsylvania. I'm the guy they send when people go missing out here, which happens more often than you'd think. Funny enough, I'm not really much of a camper myself, but, you go where the work is. The outdoorsy types always expect me to say I'm passionate about the wilderness, but I just prefer my paycheck to come with a decent health plan. That day started like any other. I was in the office, sipping my third cup of coffee and scrolling through incident reports when the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting another lost hiker who'd wandered off the trail and found their way back. Instead, I got Susan from dispatch, her voice tight with worry. Matt, we got a situation. A woman in her mid-30s hasn't checked back in after a solo trip. Her name is Laura Keene. She was supposed to return 3 days ago. I felt my stomach tighten. 3 days was a long time out here. Any last-minute location. She told her husband she was planning to hike the Minister Creek Trail. That's all we've got. I sighed, already reaching for my gear. All right, I'm on it. Get the volunteer crew ready. We'll meet at the trailhead in an hour. As I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to be a typical rescue. Solo trips aren't uncommon out here. People come to escape their lives, clear their heads. The problem is nature doesn't care if you're looking for clarity. They'll swallow you whole. And with Allegheny's dense forests and tricky paths, I always wonder why anyone risks it alone. Then again, I've got a twisted sense of humor. If someone vanishes, they probably just got tired of their suburban life. Maybe they're sipping on a mojito in Mexico while I'm trudging through the mud. But deep down, I knew better. The forest doesn't let go of its victims easily. I grabbed my pack, double-checking my supplies. Extra batteries, first aid kit, water purification tablets, and a few protein bars. I holstered my knife and paused, considering. After a moment's hesitation, I reached into my locker and pulled out my old service pistol. I rarely carried it on rescues, but something about this call had my instincts on high alert. As I drove to the trailhead, the forest loomed on either side of the road. A wall of green that seemed to press in on the narrow strip of asphalt. The trees were still unnaturally so, as if they were holding their breath. I cranked up the radio, trying to drown out the silence, but it was of no use. The quiet had already settled in, a weight on my chest that grew heavier with each passing mile. I arrived at the parking lot to find the volunteer crew already there. Local guys, good folks, but they're more into the social aspect of the job. They want to be the hero without considering the fact that heroism out here usually involves hauling a body bag. I nodded to them as I pulled up, noting the eager faces of the newer recruits mixed with the grim determination of the veterans. As I stepped out of my truck, the silence of the forest hit me like a physical force. No bird song, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive quiet that seemed to swallow every sound. I suppressed a shiver and turned to address the group. All right, listen up. We've got a missing hiker, Laura Keene. Last seen 3 days ago on the Minister Creek Trail, well split into teams of 2 and sweep the area. Radio check-ins every 30 minutes. If you find anything, and I mean anything out of the ordinary, you call it in immediately. Got it? There were nods all around. I paired everyone up, leaving myself with one of the younger guys, Matt Lee. He was eager, maybe too eager, but I figured I could keep him in line. As we get up and prepared to head out, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced at the tree line, half expecting to see eyes glinting in the shadows. But there was nothing, just the endless expanse of green, silent and waiting. I took a deep breath, shouldered my pack, and stepped onto the trail. The search for Laura Keene had begun. But as the trees closed in around us, I couldn't help but wonder if we were walking into something far worse than a simple rescue mission. The forest had secrets, and I had a sinking feeling we were about to uncover one of them. Matt Lee and I set off down the Minister Creek Trail. The silence of the forest pressed in around us. The kid was chatty, nervous energy spilling out in a stream of questions and observations. "So, Vickers, you've been doing this for what?" "A decade now," he asked, ducking under a low-hanging branch. 11 years, I grunted, scanning the ground for any sign of disturbance. "Ever think about leaving all this behind?" I paused, considering my answer. "I already did, kid. That's why I'm still here." He looked confused, but I didn't elaborate. The truth was, I tried to leave once about 5 years back. Took a job in Pittsburgh, thought I'd enjoy city life. But the forest called me back, it always does. We trekked for hours, the air growing thicker and heavier with each step. Matt's enthusiasm waned as the reality of the search set in. The forest had a way of crushing optimism. "Hey, Vickers," Matt said, his voice slow. "You ever find someone you'd hear that wasn't, all there when you found them?" I knew what he meant. The forest changed people, even if they survived. Once I said not elaborating, that shut him up. As we pushed deeper into the woods, that familiar itch started at the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched. I'd learned long ago not to ignore it. "Keep your eyes open and stay close," I told Matt. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches reaching for us like gnarled fingers. The silence was broken only by our labored breathing and the crunch of leaves underfoot. Then, suddenly, Matt stopped. "Vickers, look," he said. I followed his gaze. There, just off the trail, was a small clearing. It wasn't on any map I'd seen, and the trees around it looked wrong. They grew at odd angles, reaching in different directions, but not toward the sun. "Someone made camp here," Matt said, crouching down by what looked like a fire pit. But it wasn't a fire pit. Not really. The stones were too close together, stacked in a way that didn't make sense, and the ground was freshly dug, but there were no shovel marks. "Yeah," I muttered. "Someone tried to make it look that way." Matt was already poking around, and I could see his face shift from curiosity to something more serious. He got a light. I handed him my flashlight, and he shone it toward a small mound in the middle of what we called camp. His face went pale. "Vickers, what the hell is that?" It took me a second to process. There was a foot, not just any foot. A woman's, half buried in the dirt, clean cut at the ankle, like someone had taken a hacksaw to it. The nails were painted a bright red, chipped but still noticeable. It gagged, stumbled backward. I didn't. You get used to it in this line of work. Though this was one of the cleaner cut-off scenes I'd encountered, I crouched down, trying to piece together the scene. "This isn't where she died, this is staged." "What do you mean?" Matt asked, barely holding it together. "Someone just left her here." "Not her," I corrected. "Just a part of her." Then I clicked. The fire pit. That wasn't a campsite, it was a marker, a way to make us stop. Someone wanted us to find this. Who the hell would do that? Matt asked, his voice trembling now. I didn't answer. Truth is, I didn't know, but I've been around long enough to know when something's off. This wasn't some backwoods psychopath hiding bodies, this was a message. We radiated in, but by the time the rest of the crew showed up, it was getting dark. And there's an unspoken rule in these woods, you don't stay after sunset. We marked the spot and agreed to come back with more gear in the morning. Matt was still shaken up, and I couldn't blame him. First time seeing something like that tends to mess with your head. Me? I was more concerned with the fact that someone had gone through the trouble of leaving a foot behind, knowing full well we'd find it. As we made our way back to base camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being herded, like pieces on a chessboard moved by an unseen hand. The forest had always been dangerous, but now it felt malevolent. That night, sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned in my tent. The image of that severed foot burned into my mind, the precision of the cut, the deliberately placed stones. It all pointed to something far more sinister than a simple disappearance. As the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, I was already up and ready to go. The rest of the team looked haggard, dark circles under their eyes, suggesting I wasn't the only one who'd had a restless night. We set out early. The morning mist clung to the ground like a shroud. This time I took point, with Matt and two other experienced searchers, John and Mike, following close behind. The forest felt different today. The silence that had been oppressive yesterday now seemed expectant, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. As we neared the clearing from yesterday, that prickling sensation at the back of my neck intensified. I held up a hand, signaling the others to stop. "What is it?" John whispered. I shook my head, unable to put the feeling into words. "Something's not right. Keep your eyes open." We pushed through the underbrush, emerging into the clearing. And that's when we saw it. The foot was gone, not dragged away by animals, not buried deeper, just gone. The dirt wasn't even disturbed. Vickers, Matt said, his voice tight with panic. "We marked it right. This is the same place." I nodded, double-checking the GPS coordinates. "No mistake. This is it." Mike crouched down, examining the ground where the foot had been. There's no sign of anyone being here. No footprints, no disturbance. It's like it just vanished. That's when I knew we weren't alone out here. This wasn't just about a missing hiker anymore. We were dealing with something else entirely. I was about to suggest we fan out and search the surrounding area when I heard it. A snap just beyond the tree line. Faint but unmistakable. I held up my hand again, silencing the group. We all stood stock still, straining to hear. Another sound, a rustle, soft movement, like someone or something trying to sneak through the underbrush but not quite getting the hang of it. I pulled out my knife, cursing myself for not bringing something with more stopping power. "Spread out," I whispered. "Whatever it is, we need to find it." We moved cautiously, each taking a different direction. I headed toward where I'd heard the sound, every sense on high alert. That's when I saw it. Standing just beyond the trees was a figure, tall, hunched, with limbs that looked too long for its body. It was covered in patchy fur, and streaks of what I can only describe as mud or maybe blood. It moved awkwardly, almost like it was learning how to walk. I froze, trying to process what I was seeing. This thing, it wasn't human, but it wasn't just some animal either. It tilted its head, studying me. Its face, if you could call it that, was like someone had tried to mash a human and a wolf together but failed miserably. For a moment, neither of us moved. And then, faster than I thought possible, it lunged at me. I barely had time to shout a warning before it was on top of me, its weight slamming me to the ground. The stench of rot and decay filled my nostrils as I struggled against its grip. I could hear the others shouting, running towards us, but it all seemed distant and muffled. The creature's face was inches from mine, its hot, rancid breath washing over me. With a surge of desperate strength, I managed to bring my knife up, slashing wildly. I felt it connect, heard an inhuman shriek of pain. The weight lifted and I scrambled to my feet, gasping for air. The others had arrived, their faces pale with shock as they took in the scene. But the creature was gone, disappearing into the thick underbrush as quickly as it had appeared. What the hell is that?" Matt stammered, his eyes wide with fear. I shook my head, still trying to catch my breath. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's not natural. And I think it's what we're Wally out here to find." As we regrouped, checking for injuries and trying to make sense of what had just happened, one thing became clear. Our search for Laura Keene had just become something much more dangerous. We weren't just looking for a missing hiker anymore, we were hunting a monster. The rest of the day passed in a blur of tense searching and whispered conversations. We combed the area where I'd encountered the creature, but found nothing. No tracks, no blood, no sign that anything out of the ordinary had happened. As the sun began to dip below the tree line, casting long shadows through the forest, I made the call to head back to base camp. No one argued. The events of the day had left us all shaken, and the thought of being in these woods after dark was enough to quell any desire to continue the search. Back at camp, we huddled around a fire, the flickering flames doing little to dispel the chill that had settled into our bones. The silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional crackle of burning wood. Finally, John spoke up. "We need to talk about what happened out there." I nodded, knowing this conversation was inevitable. "All right, let's hear it. What was that thing, Vickers?" Ben asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, it couldn't have been human, right?" I sighed, rubbing my temples. "I don't know what it was, but you're right. It wasn't human, not entirely at least." Mike leaned forward, his face serious. "We need to call this in. Get more people out here. Maybe some guys with bigger guns." I shook my head. "And tell them what?" "That we saw some kind of monster in the woods. I don't think we've lost our minds." "So what do we do?" John asked. I stared into the fire, weighing our options. "We stick to the mission. We're out here to find Laura Keene. Whatever that thing is, it's connected to her disappearance. We find it. We find her." There were murmurs of agreement, though I could see the fear in their eyes. None of us were prepared for this, but we were all that stood between that creature and whoever else might wander into these woods. As the others settled in for the night, I took first watch. The forest seemed alive with whispers and movement, shadows dancing at the edge of the firelight. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves had me on edge, my hand never far from my knife. Hours passed and still, sleep eluded me. The others tossed and turned in their tents, caught in the grip of uneasy dreams. I found myself thinking about all the stories I'd heard over the years, tales of strange happenings in these woods that I'd always dismissed as campfire legend. Now I wasn't so sure. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the trees, I made a decision. We couldn't keep stumbling around in the dark, both literally and figuratively. We needed answers, and I knew just where to start looking for them. I woke the others as soon as it was light enough to see. "Change of plans," I announced. "We're heading into town. There's someone we need to talk to." They looked at me quizzically, but no one argued. After yesterday, they were willing to follow any lead. As we packed up camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest seemed to press in around us, its secrets hidden just beyond our reach. But I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter where it led us. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. Little did I know our journey into town would unveil horrors beyond anything we could have imagined. The drive into Warren was tense. Each of us was lost in our own thoughts. The lush green of the forest gave way to small towns and farmland. But even here, miles from where we'd seen the creature, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. We pulled up outside a small weathered house on the outskirts of town. An old man sat on the porch, rocking slowly in a creaky chair. This was Tom Harding, a local historian and former forest ranger. If anyone knew the secrets of these woods, it would be him. "Ned Vickers," Tom called out as we approached. "Didn't expect to see you in these parts. What brings you down from the mountain?" I introduced the team and got right to the point. "Tom, we need to talk about the forest. About the things that live there." His eyes narrowed. The rocking chair came to a stop. "Come inside," he said after a long pause. "This ain't a conversation for open air." Inside, the house was cluttered with books, maps, and odd trinkets. Tom settled into an old armchair and fixed us with a piercing stare. "What did you see out there?" We took turns recounting the events of the past 2 days, the severed foot, its mysterious disappearance, and finally, my encounter with the creature. Tom listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave with each word. When we finished, he let out a long, weary sigh. I was afraid this day would come, he said. The old timers used to talk about something in those woods, something that ain't natural. They called it the Wendigo. Wendigo, that echo, like the Native American legends. Tom nodded. Similar, but not quite the same. This thing is older. It's been there since before the first settlers came. It sleeps for long stretches, sometimes decades. And while it wakes, it hungers. The chill ran down my spine as Tom continued. It takes people, see, not just to eat, but to change them, make more of its kind. That fuck you found, that was a message. It's awake and it's hunting. How do we stop it? I asked, leaning forward. Tom's laugh was hollow. Stop it? Boy, you don't stop something like this. You survive it. You hide in primary, it goes back to sleep before it takes everything you love. We left Tom's house with more questions than answers. A growing sense of dread settled over us. As we drove back towards the forest, I noticed Matt fiddling with something. What's that? I asked. He held up a small leather-bound book. I swiped it from Tom's place, he admitted. It looked important. Maybe it has more information about this Wendigo thing. I should have been angry, but part of me was glad he'd taken it. We needed every advantage we could get. Back at the ranger station, we pored over the book. It was a journal filled with accounts of disappearances, strange sightings, and rituals meant to ward off evil. But one entry caught my eye. The beast fears fire and iron. Its lair lies where the trees grow twisted, in the heart of the dark wood. Beware the new moon, for that is when it hunts. I checked the calendar. The new moon was tonight. Gear up, I told the team. We're going back in, and this time we're prepared. We armed ourselves with makeshift torches and anything iron we could find. Fireplace pokers, old horseshoes, even a cast iron skillet. It wasn't much, but it was all we had. As we ventured back into the forest, the sun sinking low on the horizon, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. But we had no choice. If we didn't stop this thing now, I knew how many more would vanish into these woods, never to be seen again. The trees seemed to close in around us as we pushed deeper into the forest, following the twisted growth patterns Tom had described. The silence was oppressive, broken only by our labored breathing and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. Then, as night fell and the last traces of sunlight faded from the sky, we heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The hunt was on, and we were the prey. The growl echoed through the trees, sending shivers down our spines. We formed a tight circle, backs to each other, torches held high. The flickering light cast long shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Stay alert, I whispered, gripping my iron fireplace poker tightly. It could come from any direction. The forest fell silent again, but the quiet was more menacing than any sound. We could feel eyes on us, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Suddenly, Matt let out a strangled cry. I whirled around to see the creature, its elongated limbs wrapped around him, dragging him into the darkness. No, I shouted, lunging forward with my torch. The flames licked at the creature's patchy fur, and it let out an inhuman shriek, releasing Matt. For a moment, I got a clear look at the thing. It was even more horrifying up close. A grotesque amalgamation of human and animal features with eyes that glowed with an unnatural hunger. Fall back, I yelled, grabbing Matt and pulling him to his feet. We retreated, keeping our torches between us and the creature. It stalked the edge of our circle of light, letting out low, guttural sounds that might have been words in some twisted language. I could see intelligence in its eyes. This wasn't just some mindless beast. It was calculating, planning its next move. John swung his iron skillet at it as it darted in, connecting with a sickening thud. The creature howled in pain, recoiling from the touch of iron. "It's working," Mike shouted. "The iron hurts it." A small victory was short-lived. The creature's howl was answered by another, then another. Real glowing eyes appeared in the darkness around us. There's more than one, I realized with growing horror. We're surrounded. The creatures closed in, their twisted forms illuminated by our torchlight. We fought desperately, swinging our makeshift weapons and trying to keep the flames between us and them. I lost track of time as we battled. Minutes or hours could have passed. All I knew was the frantic rhythm of attack and defense, the acrid smell of singed fur, and the terrifying sounds of inhuman shrieks mingling with our own shouts of fear and determination. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The creatures retreated into the darkness, melting away like shadows at dawn. We stood there, panting and shell-shocked, hardly daring to believe we'd survived. "Is everyone okay?" I asked, looking around at my battered team. There were nods all around. We were far from unscathed. Cuts, bruises, and a few deeper gashes that would need attention. But we were alive. As the adrenaline began to fade, I noticed something on the ground where one of the creatures had fallen. A tuft of that patchy fur matted with a dark, viscous fluid that might have been blood. I carefully collected it, wrapping it in a handkerchief. Finally, we had physical evidence of what we encountered. "We need to get back," I said. "We need to patch ourselves up and figure out our next move." As we made our way back to base camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. We'd survived our first real encounter with the creatures, but at what cost? And more importantly, what would they do next? The forest seemed to press in around us, full of secrets and hidden dangers. We'd gotten a glimpse of the horror that lurked in its depths, but I had a sinking feeling that the worst was yet to come. The journey back to base camp was a blur of exhaustion and paranoia. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a potential threat. By the time we stumbled into the clearing where we set up our tents, the first light of dawn was breaking through the trees. We collapsed around the remnants of last night's fire, too drained to even speak. The reality of what we experienced was starting to sink in, and with it came a host of questions we weren't sure we wanted answered. It was Mike who finally broke the silence. "What do we do now, Vickers? We can't just pretend this didn't happen." I sighed, running a hand over my face. "We don't have much choice. Who's gonna believe us?" "We've evidence," Matt pointed out, nodding towards the handkerchief containing the tuft of creature fur. "We could take it to the authorities, get some experts involved." I shook my head. "And on what? Best case scenario, they think it's some new species of animal. Worst case, they think we're crazy or trying to pull some kind of hoax. Either way, it doesn't help us find Laura Keene or stop whatever's happening in these woods." "So we're on our own," John said quietly. "We've always been on our own," I replied. "Nothing's changed there. We just know what we're up against now." We spent the next few hours tending to our wounds and trying to piece together a plan. The creatures seemed to fear fire and iron, but we couldn't rely on that forever. We needed to find their lair, figure out how to stop them for good. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, we heard the distant sound of a helicopter. Search and rescue must have finally decided to send in air support. "All right," I said, standing up. "Here's what we're gonna do. We tell them we found signs of a struggle, maybe some blood. Animal attack, probably a bear. We keep searching, but we do it our way." The others nodded, understanding the need for secrecy. Who would believe the truth anyway? When the helicopter landed and the crew approached, we put on our best faces of concerned professionalism. I spun a tale of a tragic animal attack, careful to keep it vague enough to be believable. "I'll keep searching," I assured them. But given the time frame and the evidence we found, I don't think we're looking at a rescue anymore, more likely a recovery. The crew chief nodded grimly. All right, Vickers, well, expand the search area, bring in some more manpower. Keep us posted on anything you find. As they flew off, I felt a twinge of guilt for the deception, but I knew it was necessary. Whatever was happening in these woods, it was up to us to stop it. We spent the rest of the day combing through Tom's journal, looking for any clues about the creature's origins or weaknesses. The more we read, the more we realized how little we truly knew. As night fell once again, we huddled around the fire, each lost in our own thoughts. The weight of our secret and the enormity of what we faced pressed down on us like a physical force. "You should leave," Matt said suddenly. "Just pack up and go. Let someone else deal with this." I understood the temptation, but as I looked around at my team in the dark woods that surrounded us, I knew we couldn't walk away. "We're all that stands between these things and the rest of the world," I said quietly. "If we leave, who knows how many more people will vanish? How long before these creatures spread beyond the forest?" There was a long silence as my words sank in. Then one by one they nodded. "We're in this together, for better or worse." As we settled in for another uneasy night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something crucial. The creatures, the disappearances, the twisted trees, it all had to be connected somehow. Little did I know, the final piece of the puzzle was about to fall into place, and when it did, it would change everything we thought we knew about the horrors lurking in the Allegheny National Forest. The next few days blurred together in a haze of tense searches and sleepless nights. We combed the forest, following every lead, no matter how small. But the creatures remained elusive, appearing only in fleeting glimpses and haunting sounds that echoed through the trees. It was on the fifth day that we made the breakthrough. We pushed deeper into the forest than ever before, following a trail of twisted trees that seemed to grow more grotesque the farther we went. As we entered a small clearing, we all stopped short. Before us stood what could only be described as an altar, a crude structure of stones and bones, stained dark with what I hoped wasn't blood. "What the hell is this?" John whispered, his face pale. I approached cautiously, my iron poker at the ready. As I got closer, I noticed something carved into the central stone, a symbol I recognized from Tom's journal. "It's some kind of summoning circle," I said, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. These things, they're not just animals, they're being called here, controlled. "By who?" Nat asked, his voice shaking. Before I could answer, a twig snapped behind us. We whirled around, weapons raised, to find ourselves face to face with Laura Keene. She looked terrible, clothes torn, hair matted, eyes wild, but she was alive. "Laura," I said cautiously, lowering my poker. "We've been looking for you. Are you all right?" She stared at us blankly for a moment, and smiled. It was a horrible thing, too wide and full of teeth that seemed sharper than they should be. "We shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice a raspy whisper. "This forest belongs to us now." Before we could react, she let out an inhuman shriek. The sound was answered by howls from all around us as the creatures emerged from the shadows. What followed was a nightmare of violence and terror. We fought desperately, but we were outnumbered and outmatched. I saw John go down, dragged into the darkness by clawed hands. Mike's screams were cut short by a sickening crunch. In the chaos, I lost sight of Matt. I fought my way through the mass of twisted bodies, swinging my poker and torch wildly. Then, through a gap in the fray, I saw Laura standing by the altar, chanting in a language that hurt my ears to hear. With each surge of desperate strength, I lunged towards her. My plucker connected with her skull just as she finished her incantation. There was a flash of sickly green light. In silence, the creatures froze, then began to wither and crumble like dead leaves. In moments they were gone, leaving nothing but piles of ash. I stood there panting and bleeding, trying to process what had just happened. Man emerged from behind a tree, looking shell-shocked but alive. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked down at Laura's body at the symbol carved into the altar stone. "For now," I said, "but I don't think this is the end." In days that followed, we did our best to cover up what had really happened. We reported finding Laura's body, victim of a tragic animal attack. John and Mike were listed as missing, presumed dead. But we knew the truth, and we knew that someday, somehow, it would start again. As I sit here now, years later, I can't help but wonder if we did the right thing. Should we have told the world what we saw, what we learned, or was it better to let the secret die in those dark woods? All I know is that every time I close my eyes, I see those twisted creatures. I hear Laura's inhuman shriek, and I wonder, with a fear that never quite goes away, when they'll come back. Because in the Allegheny National Forest, silence is never just silence. It's always listening, always waiting. And sometimes in the dead of night, I swear I can hear it calling my name. The cool morning air nipped at my face as I stepped out of my cabin. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon. It was early October 2017, and the trees of Shenandoah National Park were ablaze with autumn colors. I took a deep breath, savoring the crisp scent of fallen leaves and pine. My name is Vernon Huxley, and after years of drifting between odd jobs, I'd finally found my place as a park ranger here in Virginia. It wasn't just a job, it was a chance to find some peace after a tumultuous decade. I'd always loved the outdoors. Something about the rustling leaves and the smell of pine made everything else fade away. As I made my way to the ranger station, I nodded to Mrs. Thompson, my elderly neighbor who was out tending to her garden. She waved, holding up a paper bag. "Vernon," she said, "I made you a sandwich for your hike. Can't have you wasting away out there." I chuckled, gratefully accepting the bag. "Thanks, Mrs. Thompson. You're too kind." "Nonsense," she replied, patting my arm. "You're too skinny for your good. Now be careful out there. The woods can be tricky this time of year." If only I had known how prophetic her words would be. At the station, my supervisor, Rick, was waiting with a stack of maps. "Morning, Huxley. Got a special assignment for you today." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, Rick, spread out a map on the desk. We need you to check on some remote trails in the northern section. Recent storms might have made them unsafe. Take photos, note any damage, and report back by sundown." I nodded, studying the map. The area was one I hadn't explored much, but I was always up for a challenge. "No problem, boss. I'll head out now." As I gathered my gear, compass, first aid kit, water, and Mrs. Thompson's sandwich, I couldn't shake a strange feeling of unease. I chalked it up to the early hour and set out, unaware that this routine assignment would change my life forever. The hike started pleasantly enough. The trail was well maintained for the first few miles, winding through groves of oak and maple. The leaves crunched satisfyingly under my boots, a sound that always brought me comfort. But as I ventured deeper into the less traveled areas of the park, the atmosphere began to shift. About an hour in, I noticed the forest had grown quieter. The usual chorus of birds and insects was absent, replaced by an eerie silence that reminded me of the calm before a heavy thunderstorm. But the sky above, visible in patches through the canopy, was clear and blue. "Just my imagination, Vernon," I muttered to myself. But the words sounded hollow in the stillness. I pressed on, the path growing more overgrown with each step. Vines and underbrush encroached from both sides, as if nature was trying to reclaim the trail. And, rounding a bend, I came across a massive fallen tree blocking the way. The tree looked recently felled, its leaves were still vibrant and green. As I made a note in my journal and snapped a photo with my phone, something caught my eye. Deep scratches marred the trunk, parallel and evenly spaced. They were far too large to be from any animal I knew inhabited these woods. "Well, that's not from a squirrel," I said aloud. My voice sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. I leaned in for a closer look, running my fingers along the grooves. They were deep, at least an inch into the wood. Maybe some teens messing around with a hatchet. Even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. No hatchet could make marks like these. The chill ran down my spine, and for a moment I considered turning back. But my sense of duty won out. I had a job to do after all. Climbing under the fallen giant, I continued down the path. The air grew thick, almost heavy, making each breath a conscious effort. To break the oppressive silence, I started whistling an old tune my grandfather used to hum. The notes echoed oddly among the trees, bouncing back in distorted fragments that sounded more like whispering voices than music. I stopped whistling. Another mile in, I spotted something that made me pause. A mound of rocks was piled deliberately beside the trail. On top sat a crudely carved wooden figurine, its form vaguely humanoid but with elongated limbs and a featureless face. "Art in the park," I chuckled nervously. Now I've seen everything. A laughter died in my throat as I noticed more details. The rocks were arranged in a pattern that seemed to form symbols, and a dark substance that looked disturbingly like dried blood was smeared across the figurine's chest. I snapped another photo, my hand shaking slightly. This was more than teenage mischief. Something was very wrong here. As if in response to my thoughts, a low rumbling sound reached my ears. It was so faint I almost missed it. More felt than heard. I scanned the area but saw nothing unusual. Probably just an airplane far overhead. I reasoned. But then the rumble came again, this time accompanied by a slight vibration that I could feel through my boots. An earthquake? In Virginia? I shook my head. Get a grip, Vernon. But as I continued down the trail, the sense of wrongness only grew stronger. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. Shadows deepened, despite it being midday. And always, just at the edge of hearing, that low rumble persisted. I was no longer on a routine trail check. I was walking into the heart of a mystery, one that grew darker with each step. As afternoon approached, I reached a small clearing that opened up to a breathtaking view of the valley below. On the other day, I would have paused to admire the vista and even eaten my lunch. But today, the beauty seemed tainted, overshadowed by the growing sense of dread that had taken root in my chest. I pulled out Mrs. Thompson's sandwich, more out of habit than hunger. Just as I was about to take a bite, that faint rumble came again, louder this time. The sandwich fell from my suddenly numb fingers as the ground beneath me trembled. This was no earthquake. The vibration had a rhythm to it, almost like footsteps, massive and possibly heavy footsteps. I scanned the tree line, my heart pounding. Nothing moved. The forest remained as still and silent as a photograph, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. "Hello," I called out, immediately regretting it as my voice echoed through the trees. "Is anyone there?" Silence was my only answer. I abandoned my lunch. I decided to loop back toward the station using a different trail. According to my map, it would take me past an old campsite before reconnecting with the main path. As I walked, I noticed the forest becoming denser, the trees growing closer together as if the path was slowly constricting. The canopy thickened overhead, allowing less sunlight to penetrate. It felt like dusk, though. My watch insisted it was only early afternoon. The air grew colder, and I zipped up my jacket, trying to suppress a shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. After what felt like hours but was probably 45 minutes, I came upon the campsite, or what was left of it. The area was a scene of utter devastation. Tents lay in shreds, their fabric hanging from branches like grisly flags. Camping gear was strewn about haphazardly, crushed and broken. The fire pit had been scattered, its stones flung yards away with impossible force. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice cracking. Anyone here? Only silence answered, but it was a loaded silence, pregnant with unseen menace. Approaching the wreckage, my boots squelched in the muddy ground. I looked down and froze. A dark stain spread across the earth, too red to be mud. With trembling hands, I reached for my radio to call it in, but all I got was static. Great, I muttered. Just great. As I turned to leave, a metallic glint caught my eye. Bending down, I picked up a discarded hiking boot with a small keychain attached. A tiny metal compass dangled from it, engraved with the name Liam. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cool air. We hadn't had any reports of missing hikers, let alone one named Liam. But this scene told me something was very, very wrong. That's when I heard it. A sound so out of place, it took me a moment to recognize it as laughter, high-pitched and childlike, echoing through the trees. Hello, I called out, my voice shaking. Is someone there? Do you need help? The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, guttural growl that no human throat could produce. Something crashed through the underbrush behind me. I ran. Branches whipped at my face as I tore down the path, no longer caring about following the trail. All that mattered was putting distance between myself and whatever was back there. The growl rose in volume, joined by others. A chorus of inhuman voices filled the air, and the ground shook with the impact of massive bodies in pursuit. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. Through the trees, I caught glimpses of something massive, taller than a bear, moving with a speed that defied its size. And behind it, smaller shapes darted and weaved, their eyes glowing in the gloom. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. Finally, I burst through a line of trees and found myself on a narrow dirt road. Without thinking, I turned and sprinted down it, praying it led to safety. The sounds of pursuit faded, but I didn't slow down. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I stopped even for a moment, those things would be on me. As I ran, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I was lost in a forest that no longer made sense, being chased by creatures that shouldn't exist, with no way to call for help. And night was falling. I was in serious trouble. I don't know how long I ran down that dirt road. Time seemed to stretch and warp, much like the forest around me. The towering trees on either side formed a dark tunnel, their branches reaching across like grasping fingers trying to snatch me up. Finally, my body betrayed me. My legs buckled and I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. As I lay there, the sound of my ragged breathing unnaturally loud in the stillness, I strained my ears for any sign of pursuit. Nothing. The forest was as silent as a tomb. Slowly, I pushed myself to my feet, wincing at the protest of overworked muscles. In the fading light, I took stock of my situation. Our pack was gone, lost sometime during my frantic flight, with it with my map, compass, and most of my supplies. All I had left was my flashlight, a small first aid kit in my pocket, the clothes on my back. Okay, Vernon, I muttered to myself, think what's the protocol here? But there was no protocol for this. Nothing in my training had prepared me for what I'd seen back at that campsite, or the things that had chased me. I pulled out my radio again, desperately hoping for a signal, but only static greeted me. As the last of the daylight faded, I knew I had to find shelter. Spending the night exposed on this road was not an option. With a deep breath, I clicked on my flashlight and started walking, its beam cutting a small path through the encroaching darkness. The road seemed to go on forever, with no signs of civilization. Just as I was beginning to lose hope, my light fell upon a structure ahead. An old cabin, its wood weathered and gray, stood in a small clearing just off the road. Relief flooded through me. Even if it was abandoned, it would provide some protection for the night. I approached cautiously, noting the overgrown yard and the way vines had begun to reclaim the walls. It had clearly been empty for some time. The door creaked ominously as I pushed it open, shining my light inside. Dust mode danced in the beams stirred by my entrance. The cabin was sparsely furnished, a small table, a couple of chairs and an old iron stove in one corner. A ladder lit up to a loft area. "Hello," I called out, not really expecting an answer. "Anyone here?" Silence was my only reply. I closed the door behind me, throwing the rusty bolt for good measure. It probably wouldn't stop whatever was out there, but it made me feel a little safer. I did a quick sweep of the cabin, finding nothing but dust and cobwebs. As I climbed the ladder to check the loft, my light fell upon something that made my blood run cold. Scratched into the wooden floor were symbols, similar to those I'd seen on the rock pile earlier. They formed a circle, and in the center lay a small pile of bones. Animal bones, I told myself, trying to stay calm. But a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered that they looked awfully human. I scrambled back down the ladder, my heart pounding. What had I stumbled into? This was beyond lost hikers or local legends. There was something evil in these woods, something old and patient and hungry. The sound outside snapped me out of my spiraling thoughts. Something was moving around the cabin, its footsteps heavy on the dried leaves. I killed my flashlight, plunging the cabin into darkness, and pressed my eye to a crack in the boarded-up window. At first I saw nothing but the vague shapes of trees in the moonlight. Then a shadow detached itself from the forest. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its skin, if you could call it that, was mottled and textured like tree bark. But it was the face that truly chilled me to my core, or rather the lack of one. Where features should have been, there was only a smooth, blank expanse like an unfinished sculpture. Only a mouth was visible, stretched unnaturally wide in a grotesque parody of a smile. The creature tilted its head as if listening. Then slowly, it turned toward the cabin, toward me. I stumbled back from the window, biting my lip to keep from crying out. Had it seen me? Did it know I was here? A low, rhythmic sound began to fill the air. It took me a moment to realize the creature was clicking like stones tapping together. The sound grew louder, joined by others from different directions. There were more of them out there. I pressed myself into a corner, trying to make myself as small as possible. The clicking sound circled the cabin, sometimes fading, sometimes growing so loud I was sure they must be right outside the door. And then, abruptly, silence fell. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark, barely breathing, straining my ears for any sound. Minutes stretched into hours. Exhaustion tugged at me, but I fought it. I couldn't afford to sleep. Not here. Not now. As the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the cracks in the walls, I finally allowed myself to relax slightly. I had survived the night, but as I stood stretching my cramped muscles, a new fear gripped me. What horrors would the daylight bring? As the sun rose, casting long shadows through the trees, I cautiously emerged from the cabin. The clearing was empty, showing no signs of the nightmarish creatures that had stalked the darkness, but the feeling of being watched, of something malevolent lurking just out of sight, remained. I knew I needed to find my way back to the ranger station to raise the alarm about what was happening in these woods. But without my map or compass and in unfamiliar territory, I was flying blind. My best bet, I decided, was to follow the dirt road. It had to lead somewhere. As I walked, the events of the past day played on repeat in my mind. The strange silence in the forest, the devastated campsite, the inhuman laughter, and those things. None of it made sense to me. I'd always prided myself on being rational and level-headed, but what I'd experienced defied all logic. Lost in thought, I almost missed the change in my surroundings. The trees were thinning out, and ahead I could see an open space. Hope surged through me. Maybe it was a clearing with a good vantage point, or even better, a road. But as I stepped out of the tree line, my hope turned to ash. Before me stretched a vast, perfectly circular clearing as if carved out by some giant hand. And in the center, dominating the space, stood a massive stone altar, easily 20 feet high and twice as wide. Ancient symbols, similar to those I'd seen before but far more complex, were carved into its weathered surface. The ground around it was bare earth, packed hard as if by countless feet. But it was what surrounded the altar that truly horrified me. Hanging from the trees at the edge of the clearing were hundreds of objects, backpacks, jackets, shoes, cameras, items that clearly belonged to hikers and campers. And among them, glinting in the morning light, were bones. Human bones. I stumbled back, my arm rising in my throat. This was where they had been taken. All those missing persons reports over the years, all those unsolved disappearances, this is where they ended up. A rustling sound from the tree line snapped me out of my horrified trance. Something was coming. Without thinking, I dove behind the altar, pressing myself against the cold stone. From my hiding spot, I watched as figures emerged from the forest. They looked human at first glance, but as they drew closer, I could see that something was terribly wrong. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, as if they were puppets controlled by unseen string. Their eyes were blank, unseeing, and their mouths hung open in silent screams. The figures formed a circle around the altar, swaying rhythmically. Then, as one, they began to chant. The words were like nothing I'd ever heard before, guttural and inhuman. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. I thought I should run, but my body wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed, forced to watch as the chanting grew louder and more frenzied. The symbols on the altar began to glow with an eerie blue light. Then I saw it, the creature from the night before, that tall, faceless thing that stepped into the clearing. It carried a limp form, a hiker, still alive but barely conscious, in its arms. With horrifying grace, it laid the victim on the altar. I wanted to close my eyes to block out what I knew was coming, but I couldn't look away. As the chanting reached a fever pitch, the creature raised its arms. The air shimmered, reality itself seeming to warp and bend. And then, mercifully, everything went black. I came to with a jolt, my head pounding and my mouth as dry as sandpaper. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or how I'd gotten there. Then it all rushed back. The altar, the chanting, the sacrifice. I scrambled to my feet, expecting to find myself still in that nightmarish clearing. But I was somewhere else entirely. I was in a cave, with dim light filtering in from an opening some distance away. The air was damp and cold, and the sound of dripping water echoed off the stone walls. How had I gotten here? The last thing I remembered was hiding behind the altar. Had I passed out? Had I been captured? I checked myself for injuries, but found nothing beyond some scrapes and bruises. Cautiously, I made my way toward the cave entrance. As I got closer, I could hear sounds from outside. Bird calls, the rustle of leaves in the wind, normal forest sounds that I had never been so glad to hear. I emerged from the cave into late afternoon sunlight. The forest around me looked ordinary, nothing like the twisted, menacing woods I'd been lost in. Had it all been some sort of hallucination? A vivid nightmare brought on by stress and exhaustion? That the dirt on my clothes, the scratches on my arms, and the bone-deep weariness I felt were all too real. Whatever had happened, I knew I hadn't imagined it. I needed to get back to civilization to raise the alarm. But which way should I go? I was about to pick a direction at random when I heard a sound that made my heart leap. Voices, human voices calling out. "Hello," I shouted. "Over here, I need help." Minutes later, I was surrounded by a search and rescue team. Their faces showed a mix of relief and concern as they took in my disheveled appearance. Vernon Huxley, one of the masked ones. "We've been looking for you for 2 days. What happened out there?" 2 days? I'd been missing for 2 days. I opened my mouth and closed it again. How could I possibly explain what I'd seen, what I'd experienced? They'd think I was crazy. I got lost, I said finally. Must have hit my head or something. It's all a bit fuzzy. They nodded sympathetically, clearly assuming I was in shock. As they led me back to their vehicles, I caught snippets of their conversation. Apparently, there had been a small earthquake in the area which had interfered with radio signals. That explained why I hadn't been able to call for help. But I knew the truth. Where I'd experienced was no earthquake. There was something evil in these woods, something ancient and hungry. Yet I had a feeling it wasn't done with me yet. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I was briefly hospitalized for dehydration and exhaustion, then released with a clean bill of health, physically at least. Mentally, I was far from okay. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that clearing, that altar, those inhuman figures. I jumped at every shadow, startled at every unexpected sound. My colleagues at the ranger station treated me with kid gloves, clearly worried about my state of mind. I tried to tell them what I'd seen, but the words sounded insane even to my own ears. How could I explain the impossible things I'd witnessed? In the harsh light of day, in the safe, familiar surroundings of the ranger station, it all seemed like a bad dream. But I know it wasn't. The nightmares that plagued me, the cold sweat I woke up in every night, the lingering sense of dread that followed me everywhere, these were all too real. I threw myself into research, spending hours poring over old maps of the park, searching for any mention of strange occurrences or unexplained phenomena. I found more than I bargained for. There were stories, old legends passed down by the indigenous people who had once lived in these mountains. They spoke of ancient beings that dwelled in the deep woods, of places where the veil between worlds was thin. They warned of the dangers of venturing too far off the beaten path, of the price paid by those who disturbed the old powers. And there were the missing persons reports. So many of them, stretching back decades. Hikers, campers, even a few rangers, all vanishing without a trace. The official explanations were always the same. They got lost, fell victim to the elements, or encountered hostile wildlife. But I knew better now. As the days passed, I found myself growing more and more paranoid. I was convinced that they were watching me, waiting for a chance to finish what they'd started. I installed extra locks on my doors and windows. I slept with the lights on when I slept at all. My behavior didn't go unnoticed. One day, my supervisor called me into his office, concern etched on his face. "Rainian," he said gently, "I think you need to take some time off. What happened out there? It's clearly affected you more than you're letting on. There's no shame in seeking help." I wanted to argue, to insist that I was fine. But the truth was, I wasn't fine. I was falling apart. So I took a leave of absence. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd be back once I'd sorted myself out. But deep down, I knew I could never return to those woods. Not after what I'd seen. Months passed. I left my job at the park and moved to a small apartment in the city. I tried to put the events of that fateful day behind me, to convince myself that it had all been some sort of stress-induced hallucination. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that somehow, someday, they would come for me. And that one rainy night in late autumn, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find 2 men in dark suits standing in the hallway. They flashed badges at me too quickly for me to read. One of them said, "Mr. Huxley, we need to talk about what happened to you in Shenandoah National Park." My heart raced. How did they know? Who were they? They introduced themselves as agents from a specialized government department that investigated unusual occurrences in national parks. Then more about my experience, they said. I'd seen it before. For hours, they questioned me, pressing for every detail of what I'd seen and heard in those woods. I told them everything, the relief washing over me as I finally unburdened myself to people who believed me, who didn't think I was crazy. When I finished, they exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. Mr. Huxley, one of them said finally, "What you encountered out there, it's real, and it's not confined to Shenandoah. There are things in this world, in the wild places that most people can't even imagine. Things that have been here long before us and will be here long after we're gone." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Because you've seen it now. You're part of it, whether you want to be or not. And we need people like you. People who've seen the truth and lived to tell about it." They offered me a job of sorts. Not as a field agent, I'd seen enough to last a lifetime, but as a consultant, someone who could help prepare others for what they might encounter in the dark corners of the wilderness. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse, to try and forget everything I'd seen and experienced. But I knew I couldn't. Those things were out there and people needed to be warned. "All right," I said finally, "I'll do it." As they left, one of the agents turned back to me. "Remember, Mr. Huxley, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but they're also dangerous. And they're always watching." I nodded, a chill running down my spine. I knew he was right. The horrors I'd witnessed in Shenandoah were real, and they were not confined to that one patch of forest. They were out there, in the wild places, waiting. And now it was my job to make sure others were prepared for the terrors that lurked in the shadows of the trees. I was halfway through my shift when the call came in. Now, when I say shift, I'm not talking about anything glamorous. This is small-town cop work. You break up bar fights, remind people that the speed limit signs aren't optional, and maybe, just maybe, on a really wild day, you arrest a drunk guy who's trying to fight the local mailman. But that's the life in Parker's Creek, Ohio. Population, just enough people to remember your name, but not enough to know your business. I'm Officer J. Donovan. Been on the job for about 12 years now. Parker's Creek is a quiet place, mostly. It's the kind of town where everybody knows everybody and no one minds their own business. It's like living in a sitcom, except there are fewer laugh tracks and way more unpaid parking tickets. That day had started like any other. I'd woken up at the crack of dawn, kissed my wife goodbye, and headed out to patrol the sleepy streets of our little town. The morning had been uneventful. I'd given out a couple of warnings for expired tags, helped Mrs. Hendricks corral her escaped chickens again, and grabbed a coffee at Dottie's diner. By mid-afternoon, I was starting to think about calling it a day early. Maybe head home, surprise the wife with some takeout from that new Chinese place on Main Street. That's when the call came in, crackling over the radio and shattering the monotony of my day. "Officer Stonovan, we've got a situation out at Cole's bait shop. Roger's reporting he's not making much sense. Can you head out there and check it out?" I sighed, visions of egg rolls and fortune cookies vanishing from my mind. 10-4. Dispatch. I'm on my way. As I steered my cruiser towards the outskirts of town, I couldn't help but wonder what old Roger Cole was up to now. The guy's been around forever. He's always telling people about the biggest fish he'd never caught. He wasn't usually one for causing a fuss, though. Something must have really rattled him. Little did I know that Cole was about to change everything, not just for me, but for all of Parker's Creek. The drive out to Cole's bait shop wasn't long, maybe 15 minutes from the center of town. As I pulled up, I could see Roger pacing back and forth in front of his shop, his weathered hands wringing together nervously. I stepped out of the cruiser, the gravel crunching under my boots. "What's going on, Roger?" I called out, trying to keep my tone light and casual. Roger's head snapped up, his eyes wild and unfocused. For a moment he looked at me like he didn't recognize me. Then his face crumpled with relief. "Chase, thank God you're here," he said. "You gotta come see this. You're not gonna believe it." His voice was shaking, a far cry from the boisterous, jovial tone I was used to hearing from him. Roger wasn't the type to get spooked easily. He'd lived in Parker's Creek his whole life, seen all kinds of things in these woods. Whatever had him this worked up, it couldn't be good. "Slow down, Roger," I said, approaching him cautiously. "What exactly am I not gonna believe?" He shook his head frantically. "No time to explain. You gotta see it for yourself. Follow me." Before I could protest, Roger was already heading towards the tree line behind his shop. I hesitated for a moment, glancing back at my cruiser. Protocol said I should radio in, let dispatch know I was following up on the call. But something in Roger's demeanor made me pause. Whatever he wanted to show me, it seemed urgent. With a sigh, I followed him into the woods, leaves crunching underfoot as we made our way deeper into the forest. The trees loomed overhead, their branches creating a canopy that filtered the afternoon sunlight into dappled shadows on the forest floor. "Roger, where exactly are we going?" I called out, ducking under a low-hanging branch. "Just a little further," he called back, not slowing his pace. "It's in a clearing up ahead." As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The woods seemed quieter than usual. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just the sound of our footsteps and my own increasingly rapid heartbeats. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only about 10 minutes, we broke through into a small clearing. At first, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Just a typical patch of forest, sunlight streaming down into the open space. Then the smell hit me, the coppery tang of blood, mixed with the sickly, sweet odor of decay. My hand instinctively went to my gun as my eyes scanned the clearing, finally landing on the source of the stench. There, in the center of the clearing, lay the mangled remains of what I could only assume was once a deer. Its body had been torn apart, innards strewn across the forest floor like some kind of macabre abstract painting. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, taking a step closer to examine the carcass. "What the hell did this, Roger?" Roger's voice was barely above a whisper when he replied, "That's what I've been trying to tell you, Jace. There's something out here. Something mean." As I crouched down to get a better look, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The tracks around the carcass weren't like anything I'd ever seen before. They were too big to be a coyote or wolf, and the shape was all wrong. Whatever had done this, it wasn't any animal native to these parts. I stood up slowly, my hand still resting on my holstered weapon. "Roger, how long has this been here?" He shook his head. "Found it this morning when I came out to check my traps." "But Jace, that's not all. There's been other things. Hikers gone missing. More animals turned up dead. Whatever's out here, it's been busy." I opened my mouth to respond and tell Roger we needed to get back to town and report this properly. But before I could get the words out, a sound echoed through the clearing. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Roger's face went pale. "It's here," he whispered. "We need to go. Now." As we turned to run, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. Something large moving fast through the underbrush. And in that moment, I knew that our quiet little town was about to change forever. We tore through the woods, branches whipping at our faces as we ran. The sound of our pursuer crashed behind us, getting closer with each passing second. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. But pure adrenaline kept me moving. "Almost there," Roger gasped, his face red with exertion. I could see the tree line ahead, the comforting sight of Roger's shop just beyond. We burst out of the forest, stumbling onto the gravel lot. "Get in, Roger," I yelled. finally managing to wrench the door open. Roger didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled into the passenger seat as I started the engine. The tires spun in the gravel as I floored it, peeling out of the lot and onto the road back to town. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were our heavy breathing and the hum of the engine as I pushed the cruiser well past the speed limit. Finally, when I felt we were far enough away, I eased off the gas and glanced over at Roger. He was slumped in the seat, his face ashen. What was that thing, Jace?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "I don't know, Roger, but whatever it is, it's not natural." I could still hear that growl echoing in my ears. Could still see the unnatural way that thing had moved through the trees. "We need to report this, get some help out here." Roger nodded weakly. Yeah, you're right. But who's gonna believe us? Hell, I saw it with my own eyes, and I barely believe it. He had a point. Parker's Creek wasn't exactly equipped to deal with whatever this was, but we had to try. People's lives could be at stake. As we pulled into town, I made a decision. I'm taking you to the station, Roger. When I file a report, get everything on record, then we'll figure out our next move. The station was quiet when we arrived. Just a couple of officers on desk duty. They looked up in surprise as Roger and I burst through the doors. "Chiefin?" I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Officer Ramirez nodded, her eyebrows furrowed in concern. "Yeah, he's in his office." "Everything okay, Stonovan?" I didn't answer, just headed straight for the chief's office with Roger in tow. I knocked once, then pushed the door open without waiting for a response. Chief Barker looked up from his paperwork, surprised quickly, turning to annoyance. "Stonovan, what's the meaning of this?" I took a deep breath, trying to figure out how to explain what we've seen without sounding completely insane. "Chief, we've got a situation out in the woods. Something dangerous." Over the next hour, Roger and I took turns explaining what we had encountered. The mangled deer, the strange tracks, the creature pursuing us through the woods. With each passing minute, I could see the skepticism growing on the chief's face. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, studying us both carefully. "Let me get this straight," he said slowly. "You're telling me there's some kind of monster prowling around in our woods, killing animals and chasing people?" Put like that, it did sound ridiculous, but I stood my ground. "I know how it sounds, Chief, but I'm telling you, this is real and it's dangerous. I'll need to do something about it." Chief Barker sighed, rubbing his temples. "Looks, Stonovan, you're a good officer, and Roger, you're a respected member of this community. But this is a bit much. Maybe you saw a bear or a mountain lion. Hell, maybe some kids are playing a prank. But I can't justify allocating resources based on a wild story about some unidentified creature." Frustration was rising inside me. "Chief, with all due respect, this isn't a bear or a prank. People could be in danger. We need to at least warn the community, organize a search party." "Enough," the chief's voice cut through my protests. "He'll send a couple of officers out to check the area tomorrow. In the meantime, I suggest you both go home and get some rest. You've had a long day." I opened my mouth to argue further, but the look on the chief's face told me it would be pointless. With a resigned nod, I stood up. "Come on, Roger. I'll give you a ride home." As we left the station, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across town. Roger was quiet as we drove, his eyes fixed on the darkening tree line in the distance. "What are we going to do, Jace?" he finally asked as I pulled up in front of his house. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my mind racing. "I don't know, Roger, but I'm not giving up. Whatever that thing is, it's a threat to our town. And if the chief won't do anything about it, then I guess it's up to us." As Roger got out of the car, I made a silent vow. I was going to find out what was lurking in our woods, with or without the department's help. Little did I know the hunt was only just beginning. The next few days passed in a haze of paranoia and frustration. True to his word, Chief Burker had sent a couple of officers out to check the area around Roger's shop, but they'd come back empty-handed. No signs of any unusual animal activity they'd reported. Just a few normal tracks and some half-eaten animal carcasses. Nothing out of the ordinary for the woods. I knew better. I could still feel the weight of that thing's gaze on me, still hear its inhuman growl echoing in my dreams. But without any concrete evidence, my hands were tied. It was on the fourth night after I encountered that things took a turn. I was at home trying to distract myself with paperwork when my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Marge from the diner. Jace. Her voice was trembling when I answered. Hi. I think you need to come down here. There's something you should see. My heart rate spiked. What is it, Marge? Are you okay? I'm fine, but just come, please. I was in my car before the call even ended, speeding towards the diner. When I arrived, I found Marge standing outside, wringing her hands nervously. She pointed wordlessly to the side of the building. As I rounded the corner, I felt my breath catch in my throat. Carved deep into the wooden siding of the diner were 3 long parallel gashes. They were too high up and too deep to have been made by any normal animal. Found it when I was closing up. Marge said softly, coming up behind me, Jace, what could have done this? I ran my hand over the marks, feeling the splintered wood beneath my fingers. I don't know, Marge, but I intend to find out. Word spread quickly after that. In a town like Parker's Creek, news travels fast. By the next morning, it seemed everyone had heard about the strange marks on the diner. Rumors started flying. Some said it was just vandals, others insisted it was some kind of wild animal. But I knew the truth, and I wasn't the only one. The next morning I was having coffee at the diner when Roger slid into the booth across from me. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. It's getting bolder, he said without preamble. Coming into town now. I nodded grimly. Seems that way. But we still don't know what it is. Roger leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. I've been asking around, Jace. Turns out we're not the only ones who've seen something strange in those woods. He went on to tell me about the stories he'd gathered. A hunter who swore he'd seen a creature bigger than any bear moving impossibly fast through the trees. A group of campers who'd been chased from their site in the middle of the night by something they couldn't describe. Even old Mrs. Pritchard, who lived on the edge of town, claimed she'd heard unearthly howls coming from the forest at night. People are scared, Jace. Roger finished. They're just too afraid to speak up about it. I sat back, my mind racing. If all these stories were true, then whatever was out there had been around for a while, and it was getting more aggressive. We need to do something, I said to myself rather than to Roger. He nodded in agreement. But what? The chief won't listen to us, and we can't exactly go monster hunting on our own. I had thought for a moment, then an idea struck me. Maybe we can't, but we can gather evidence, proof that something's out there, enough to convince the chief to take this seriously. And so, our plan was born. Over the next few days, Roger and I discreetly reached out to those who had encounters. We collected statements, gathered whatever physical evidence we could find, unusual tracks, more of those strange claw marks found on trees and occasionally buildings on the outskirts of town. But our big break came about a week later. I was on night patrol, driving along the road that skirted the edge of the forest, when my headlights caught something in the road ahead. I slowed to a stop, my hand instinctively going to my gun as I stepped out of the cruiser. There, in the middle of the road, was a large, dark shape. As I approached, I realized with a start that it was a body but not a human body. It was another deer, just as mangled as the one we'd found in the clearing. But this time it wasn't hidden away in the woods. It was out on the open, almost like it had been left there deliberately, a message. As I stood there staring at the gruesome scene, I heard it. That same low, rumbling growl from the woods. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and for just a split second I saw it. Two glowing eyes reflecting the light back at me. A massive, shadowy form, bigger than any animal I'd ever seen. Then, the blink of an eye, it was gone. I fumbled for my radio, my hand shaking. Dispatch, this is Officer Donovan. I need backup out on Old Forest Road. And get the chief out here too. We've got a situation. As I waited for backup to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The woods seemed to press in around me, full of shadows and secrets. Somewhere out there I knew was the creature that had brought this terror to our quiet little town. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. The discovery of the deer carcass on Old Forest Road had finally gotten the chief's attention. Suddenly the entire department was on high alert. Patrols were increased, especially around the outskirts of town. We put out warnings to the public, advising them to avoid the woods and report any unusual sightings. But even with all eyes on the forest, the creature remained elusive. We'd catch glimpses of shadow moving too fast through the trees, strange tracks that would disappear into nothing, the occasional sound of that bone-chilling growl echoing through the night. But we could never pin it down. The town was on edge. People were scared to go out after dark. The woods that had once been a place of recreation and beauty were now viewed with fear and suspicion. And all the while, the attacks continued. It wasn't just animals anymore. We started getting reports of missing hikers, campers who never returned from their trips. Search parties would go out, only to come back empty-handed, or worse, with only scattered belongings and ominous signs of struggle. I threw myself into the investigation, spending every waking moment trying to piece together the puzzle. I pored over old town records, looking for any history of similar incidents. I reached out to wildlife experts trying to find an explanation for what we were dealing with, but nothing seemed to fit. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that I stumbled across something interesting. An old newspaper article from nearly 50 years ago buried in the town archives. The headline read, "Strange creatures sighted in Parker's Creek Woods." The article was vague, full of second-hand accounts and speculation. But the descriptions, they were eerily similar to what we were experiencing now. A large-eyed unidentified animal, unusual tracks, livestock found torn apart. I dug deeper and found more. Every few decades it seemed Parker's Creek had experienced a rash of similar incidents. It always eventually died down, fading into local legend. But now it seemed the cycle was beginning again. I took my findings to the chief, hoping that historical context would help him understand the gravity of our situation. To his credit, he listened more openly this time. "I didn't know what to make of all this, Donovan," he said, rubbing his temples. "But I can't deny that something strange is going on. What do you suggest we do?" I had been thinking about this. "We need to organize a proper search, Chief. Not just patrols, but a coordinated effort to sweep the woods. Whatever this thing is, we need to find it before it hurts anyone else." The chief nodded slowly. "All right, put together a team. But be careful out there, Stonover. We still don't know what we're dealing with." Over the next few days, I assembled a group of our best officers along with some experienced local hunters who volunteered to help. We mapped out the woods, divided them into sectors, and planned our search. The morning of the search dawned clear and cool. As we gathered at the edge of the forest, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anticipation and dread. We were finally taking action, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something far beyond our understanding. "All right, listen up," I addressed the group. "We stick to our team. We stay in radio contact at all times. If anyone sees anything unusual, you call it in immediately. Do not engage on your own. Cry clear. A chorus of affirmatives answered me. With a deep breath, I turned to face the woods. Okay, let's move out. As I entered the forest, the sounds of the town faded away, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the crunch of twigs under our feet. The air felt heavy, charged with tension that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. For hours, we combed through the woods, finding nothing but the usual forest debris and occasional animal tracks. But as the day wore on, an uneasy feeling began to settle over the group. It was too quiet, no birds singing, no small animals scurrying about. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. We were deep in the woods when the first scream rang out. It came from somewhere to our left, echoing through the trees. Without hesitation, I radioed for everyone to converge on the location. As I ran towards the sound, my heart pounding in my chest, I couldn't help but think that this was it. We were finally going to come face to face with whatever had been terrorizing our town, but nothing could have prepared me for what we found. We burst into a small clearing, weapons drawn, ready for anything. But what we saw made us all stop in our tracks. One of our search teams was there, but they weren't alone. Towering over them was a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It was massive. Easily 8 feet tall, with a body that seemed to be a nightmarish blend of bear and wolf. Its fur was matted and dark, hanging in clumps from a muscular frame. But it was the face that truly chilled me to the bone. Intelligent eyes gleamed from a head that was almost human-like in its structure, but with a protruding snout filled with razor-sharp teeth. For a moment, everything remained still. The creature regarded us with an unsettling intelligence, its chest heaving with each breath. Then, faster than seemed possible for something of its size, it moved. It lunged for the nearest officer, massive claws extended. I snapped out of my shock and shouted, "Fire!" The sound of gunshots filled the air as we opened fire on the beast. But to our horror, the bullets seemed to have little effect. They slowed it down, yes, but didn't stop it. It roared in pain and anger, a sound that shook the very ground beneath our feet. In the chaos that followed, I lost track of everything except the need to survive. The creature marched through our group with terrifying speed and strength, wiping officers aside like rag dolls. I emptied my clip into it, but it kept coming. I saw Roger, who had insisted on joining the search, get knocked to the ground. Without thinking, I rushed to his side, placing myself between him and the monster. The creature loomed over me, its hot breath washing over my face. In that moment, looking into its eyes, I saw something that shook me to my core. There was intelligence there, yes, but also a deep primal hunger. This wasn't just an animal acting on instinct. This was something else entirely. Just as I thought it was going to be the end, a blast of gunfire erupted from the tree line. The creature roared in pain and frustration, then turned and bounded off into the woods with incredible speed. As the sound of its retreat faded, I became aware of the scene around me. Several officers were down, injured but thankfully alive. The reinforcements that had fired on the creature emerged from the trees, led by the chief himself. What in God's name was that? The chief asked, his face pale. I shook my head, still trying to process what I'd seen. I don't know, Chief, but whatever it is, it's not natural and it's far more dangerous than we ever imagined. As we tended to the wounded and called for emergency services, I couldn't shake the image of the creature's eyes from my mind. We had come face to face with our tormentor, but instead of answers, I was left with even more questions. What was this thing? Where did it come from? And most importantly, how were we going to stop it? The aftermath of our encounter in the woods was chaos. Injured officers were rushed to the hospital and the town was thrown into a state of panic when news of the attack spread. No longer could anyone deny the reality of the threat we were facing. The chief called an emergency town meeting. The commodity center was packed, the air thick with fear and tension as he stood up to address the crowd. "People of Parker's Creek," he began, his voice grave. "I know you're all scared. I know there have been rumors and speculation about what's been happening in our town. Today, I'm here to confirm that there is indeed a dangerous creature in our woods." A murmur ran through the crowd. I saw faces pale, saw people grabbing onto their loved ones. The chief held up his hands for silence. "I want to assure you that we are doing everything in our power to deal with this threat. We've reached out to state wildlife services and are bringing in additional resources. In the meantime, we're imposing a curfew. No one is to enter the woods under any circumstances." As he continued to outline the precautions we'd be taking, I scanned the crowd. I saw fear in their eyes, yes, but also determination. This was our town, our home. We weren't going to let this thing drive us out. After the meeting, I approached the chief. "What's our next move?" I asked. He sighed heavily. "Honestly, Stonovan, I'm out of my depth here. This isn't like anything we've dealt with before. We need help." And help came in the form of a team of wildlife experts and cryptozoologists who arrived a few days later. They set up base in our station, turning one of our conference rooms into a makeshift research center. Dr. Elena Reeves, the lead researcher, was a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She listened intently as we briefed her on everything that had happened. "What you're describing," she said slowly, "doesn't match any known species, but there have been legends in various cultures of creatures that bear some similarities. Werewolves, skinwalkers, that sort of thing." I couldn't help but scoff. "You're saying we're dealing with some kind of mythical creature?" She fixed me with a stern look. "Officer Stonovan, you've seen this thing with your own eyes. Are you really in a position to dismiss anything at this point?" She had a point. After what I'd seen in those woods, I was ready to believe just about anything. Over the next few weeks, we worked tirelessly to track the creature. We set up camera traps throughout the woods, analyzed hair and tissue samples found at attack sites, and poured over every scrap of information we could find. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. The creature seemed to have a territory that it patrolled, centered around a part of the forest known as the Dark Hollow. It was incredibly strong and fast, with heightened senses that made it nearly impossible to sneak up on, but it wasn't invulnerable. The bullets from our guns had hurt it even if they hadn't been enough to bring it down. And there were other things we learned. It seemed to avoid fire. Silver, contrary to the old legends, didn't seem to have any special effect on it. As we gathered more information, Dr. Reeves worked on developing a plan to capture or neutralize the creature. But time wasn't on our side. The attacks were becoming more frequent and brazen. It was only a matter of time before someone was killed. Then one night, everything changed. It was at the station, poring over maps of the forest, when Roger burst in, out of breath and wild-eyed. "Jace," he gasped. It took Annie. Annie was Roger's granddaughter, a bright-eyed girl of 16 who helped out at the bait shop sometimes. My blood ran cold. "Log in?" I demanded, already reaching for my gear. "Just now," Roger said, his voice breaking. "She was closing up the shop. I heard her scream, but by the time I got outside, I didn't need to hear anymore. I radioed for backup and headed for my cruiser, with Roger right behind me. As we sped toward the woods, I knew that this was it. This was the final confrontation. One way or another, this hunt was going to end tonight. The woods were eerily silent as we made our way through the darkness. The beam of my flashlight cut through the gloom, illuminating a path that I knew led to the heart of the creature's territory, the Dark Hollow. Behind me, I could hear the labored breathing of Roger and the rest of our hastily assembled search party. Dr. Reeves had insisted on coming along. armed with tranquilizer guns and other equipment she hoped might subdue the creature. As we pushed deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around us, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The air grew thick and heavy, filled with an oppressive silence that set my nerves on edge. Suddenly, a scream pierced the night, high and terrified. "Annie, this way," I shouted, breaking into a run. The others followed close behind as we crashed through the underbrush, our hearts pounding. We burst into a clearing, and there, in the center, was the creature. It stood on its hind legs, towering over us, with Annie clutched in one massive paw. The girl was pale with fear but alive, struggling weakly against the monster's grip. For a moment, everything froze. The creature's eyes gleamed in the darkness, filled with that same unnerving intelligence I'd seen before. It let out a low growl, a sound that vibrated through my very bones. "Let her go." Roger's anguished cry broke the silence. He started forward, but I held him back. "Careful," I warned, my eyes never leaving the creature. "We need to be smart about this." Dr. Reeves stepped forward slowly, her tranquilizer gun raised. "We don't want to hurt you," she said, her voice calm despite the tremor I could see in her hands. "Just let the girl go." The creature tilted its head almost as if it was considering her words. For a brief, hopeful moment, I thought it might actually understand. Then, with a roar that shook the trees, it charged. What followed was chaos. Gunshots rang out as we opened fire, trying desperately to bring the monster down without hitting any. Dr. Reeves fired her tranquilizers. The darts embedded themselves in the creature's thick hide. But it wasn't enough. The beast moved with incredible speed, lashing out with claws and teeth. I saw officers go down, heard screams of pain and fear. In the midst of the fray, I caught sight of Annie. The creature had dropped her when we opened fire, and she was crawling away, trying to reach the safety of the trees. Without hesitation, I ran towards her. The creature saw me coming and lunged, its massive jaws snapping shut inches from my face. I rolled, came up firing, emptying my clip into its chest. The monster staggered back, roaring in pain and rage. But still, it didn't go down. As I reached Annie, pulling her to her feet, I saw Roger out of the corner of my eye. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, a flare gun in his hand. Our eyes met, and I understood instantly. "Everyone back," I shouted, dragging Annie with me as I retreated. Roger raised the flare gun and fired. The bright red flare arched through the air, landing at the creature's feet. For a moment, the beast looked down at it, almost curiously. Then the woods erupted in flames. The fire spread quickly, feeding on the dry underbrush. The creature howled, a sound of pain and fury that made my blood run cold. It thrashed about, trying to escape the flames, but everywhere it turned, fire blocked its path. We watched in horrified fascination as the beast was engulfed. Its howls grew weaker, its movements slower, until finally, with one last ear-splitting roar, it collapsed. As the flames died down, leaving behind a smoldering, ash-covered clearing, an eerie silence fell over the woods. It was over. The creature that had terrorized our town for so long was no more. In the days that followed, there were many questions. Investigators combed through the ashes. Scientists examined what little remained of the creature's body. Theories were put forward. Genetic experiment gone wrong. Undiscovered species, even extraterrestrial origin. But in the end, we never got a definitive answer. Parker's Creek slowly began to heal. The woods, once a place of terror, gradually reclaimed their place as a source of beauty and peace for our town. Life went on. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the trees, I find myself looking towards the dark hollow. And I wonder, was that really the end? Or is something else out there waiting in the shadows, ready to remind us that there are still mysteries in this world that we may never fully understand? As I stand on my porch watching the sun set over the tree line, I can't shake the feeling that our encounter in those woods changed something fundamental about our town, about all of us who lived through it. We had faced the unknown, stared into the eyes of a nightmare, and survived. But at what cost? And what would we do if someday we heard that bone-chilling growl echoing through the night once more? Only time will tell. But one thing's for certain, Parker's Creek will never be the same. In the months that followed, our town slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The woods, once off-limits, were cautiously reopened to the public. Hikers and campers returned, though many still gave the dark hollow a wide berth. As for me, I found myself changed by the experience. My eyes had been opened to a world beyond what I thought I knew, and I couldn't simply go back to being the small-town cop I once was. I took a leave of absence from the force, using the time to work with Dr. Reeves and her team. We compiled our findings, cross-referencing them with similar incidents from around the world. It turns out Parker's Creek wasn't as unique as we thought. Roger retired from running the bait shop, passing it on to Annie. The ordeal had brought them closer, and it wasn't uncommon to see them sitting on the shop's porch, keeping a watchful eye on the tray line. Chief Barker, to his credit, never tried to cover up what had happened. He worked with state officials to establish new protocols for dealing with unconventional wildlife threats, as they were diplomatically termed. Parker's Creek became something of a case study in cryptozoological incident management, but even as life moved forward, the memory of those terrifying weeks lingered. On quiet nights when the wind rustled through the leaves just so I'd find myself reaching for a weapon that was no longer at my hip. And I wasn't the only one. Our town had faced something beyond explanation, and it had left its mark on all of us. As I stand here now, watching the sun set over the familiar skyline of Parker's Creek, I can't help but reflect on how much has changed. We're still the same small town in many ways. Gossip still spreads faster than wildfire, and everyone still knows everyone else's business. But there's a newfound respect for the unknown, a heightened awareness of the world beyond our borders. And sometimes when I look out at those woods, I swear I can see something moving in the shadows. A reminder, perhaps, that there are still mysteries out there waiting to be uncovered. Or maybe it's just my imagination forever altered by that fateful summer when our quiet little town faced the unimaginable. Whatever the case, one thing's for certain. Parker's Creek has a story to tell, a story of terror, of courage, and of a community coming together in the face of the unknown. It's a story that will be passed down through generations, growing and changing with each telling. As for me, I'll keep watching those woods, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you never know what might be lurking just beyond the trees. And next time, if there is a next time, we'll be ready. The Colorado River stretched out before me, a silver ribbon winding through the rugged landscape. I found the perfect spot to park my RV. Secluded enough for peace and quiet, but not so isolated that I'd have to worry about bears or other wildlife deciding to pay me an unwelcome visit. As I set up camp, I breathed in the crisp mountain air, feeling the tension in my shoulders start to ease. My name is Owen Pritchard, and I've been doing this for years now, seeking out hidden corners of nature and trying to find some semblance of peace in the great outdoors. It started as a coping mechanism after I lost my wife Marie to cancer 5 years ago. Our house became a mausoleum of memories, every room a reminder of what I'd lost. So I bought an RV and hit the road, telling myself it was just temporary, just until I could face going home again. 5 years later, and I'm still out here. As I finished setting up, I took stock of my supplies, fishing gear, check, a good book, check, enough food and water to last a few days, double check. I had everything I needed for a quiet weekend away from the world. The sun was setting as I lit a small campfire. I sat back in my folding chair, watching the flames dance and listening to the gentle rush of the river. For the first time in weeks, I felt myself truly relax. And here, there were no pitying looks from neighbors, no well-meaning friends trying to set me up on dates, no empty house echoing with ghosts of laughter long silenced, just me in the wilderness. As night fell, I doused the fire and retreated to my RV. I lay in bed listening to the nighttime sounds of the forest. An owl hooted in the distance, wind rustled through the trees, and somewhere a coyote yipped. I drifted off to sleep, unaware that this peaceful night would be my last for a long time. The next morning dawned bright and clear. I awoke with the sun, my body clock synced to nature's rhythms after years on the road. I made some coffee over a fresh campfire, savoring the rich aromas that mingled with the scent of pine and river water. By mid-morning I was out on the river with my fishing rod. A gentle current tugged at my line as I cast it out again and again. It was meditative, the repetitive motion allowing my mind to wander. I thought about Marie as I often did in these quiet moments. She would have loved it here. We had always talked about taking a long road trip after retirement, seeing all the natural wonders this country had to offer. Now I was living that dream, but alone. It was around noon when things started to get strange. I just rolled in a decent-sized trout when I noticed movement at the edge of the clearing. A man had appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. He was tall and gaunt, with a scruffy beard and a worn-out baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. His clothes were dirty and torn, like he'd been living rough for quite some time. I gave him a nod, expecting the usual camper-to-camper small talk. Maybe he'd ask how the fishing was, or if I had seen any interesting wildlife. But he just stood there staring at me with an intensity that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Howdy," I called out, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. "Nice day for fishing, huh?" The man didn't respond. He just kept staring, his eyes never leaving my face. Then, without a word, he turned and walked off into the woods. I stood there for a moment, unsettled. In all my years of camping, I'd never had an encounter quite like that. People come out to these remote spots for all sorts of reasons, I reminded myself. Maybe he was just socially awkward, or maybe he'd come out here specifically to avoid human contact. Still, as I packed up my fishing gear and headed back to the RV, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. I grilled the trout I caught for lunch, then settled in for a nap. The encounter with the strange man had left me feeling on edge, and I figured some rest might help clear my head. I must have dozed off longer than I intended, because when I woke up the light was starting to fade. That's when I noticed the footprints. Muddy prints led from the river up to my RV, circled once, then disappeared back into the woods. They weren't my The pattern was all wrong for my hiking boots. A chill ran down my spine as I realized someone had been prowling around my campsite while I slept. Suddenly, the forest that had seemed so peaceful just hours ago felt ominous and threatening. Beneath shadows seemed to hide potential dangers. Every rustle of leaves could be an approaching threat. I hurried back into the RV, locking the door behind me. As darkness fell, I found myself jumping at every sound, peering nervously out the windows into the gathering gloom. Something had changed. The peace I'd found in nature had been shattered, replaced by a growing sense of dread. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would push me to my very limits. As night finally descended, the forest came alive with sounds, the hooting of owls, the rustling of small animals in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through the trees, all normal nighttime noises that had never bothered me before. But tonight, every sound seemed magnified, ominous. I sat in the RV, all lights off, straining my ears for any sign of human movement outside. Hours ticked by. My eyes grew heavy, but I fought against sleep, too keyed up to relax. It was around midnight when I heard it, a rustling outside, different from the ambient forest noises. This was deliberate movement, the sound of someone trying to be stealthy and not quite succeeding. I grabbed my flashlight, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Slowly, carefully, I approached the window, dreading what I might see. At first there was nothing, just trees and shadows. Then, a movement caught my eye. A figure darted between two trees, quick and low to the ground. I only caught a glimpse, but it was enough to send a jolt of fear through me. It was the man from earlier, I was sure of it. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. What did he want? Why was he skulking around my campsite in the middle of the night? Suddenly the door handle jiggled. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. The handle stopped moving, and for a moment there was silence. Then came a loud bang against the door. I jumped back, biting back a shout of surprise. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for the knife I kept in a drawer for emergencies. I gripped it tightly, trying to steady my nerves. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "I'm armed, but I've called the Rangers. They're on their way." It was a bluff. I had no cell service out here, but I hoped it might be enough to scare off my nocturnal visitor. For a long moment there was silence. Then came another bang, harder this time. The whole RV shook with the impact. I pressed my ear to the door, listening intently. Heavy breathing came from the other side, ragged and somehow eager. A chill ran down my spine. This was no ordinary drifter looking to rob me. There was something primal, almost feral in that breathing. I stepped back, my mind whirling. I couldn't read it out, hoped that whoever was out there would eventually give up and leave. Or I could confront them, try to scare them off. In the end, the decision was made for me. There was a screech of metal on metal, and I realized with horror that my unwanted guest was trying to pry the door open. Adrenaline surged through me. In that moment, fear turned to anger. This was my space, my sanctuary, and I'd be damned if I let some creep invade it. I yanked the door open, flashlight in one hand and knife in the other. The sudden movement caught my attacker off guard. He stumbled back, and for the first time I got a clear look at his face. There was the scruffy man from earlier, but his appearance had deteriorated even further. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, darting around frantically. Foam flecked the corners of his mouth. In his hand he clutched a crowbar, raised and ready to strike. For a split second we locked eyes. I saw no recognition there, no humanity, just a feral, unhinged hunger. Then he lunged at me, the crowbar swinging down in a vicious arc. Time seemed to slow down as the crowbar descended towards my head. Instinct took over. I ducked to the side, feeling the wind of the swing ruffle my hair. The crowbar clanged against the RV's door frame. The impact sent vibrations up my arm. Before he could recover, I swung my flashlight, catching him on the side of the head. The heavy-duty maglac connected with a sickening thud. He staggered but didn't go down. "Back off!" I shouted, brandishing my knife. "I don't want to hurt you." But there was no reasoning with him. With a guttural growl, he charged at me again. This time, survival instinct overrode any hesitation. As he came in close, I lashed out with the knife, catching him in the stomach. He grunted, more from surprise than pain, it seemed. The knife hadn't gotten deep, but blood was already seeping through his filthy shirt. He looked down at the wound, then back at me. His eyes filled with a mixture of rage. And was that fear? The crowbar slipped from his grasp as he stumbled backward, clutching at his stomach. He collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. I stood over him, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. The knife in my hand was slick with blood. I felt sick. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear and adrenaline. He didn't respond, just lay there wheezing. I needed to restrain him, call for help. But how? I was miles from the nearest town with no cell service. "Don't move," I warned him, backing towards the RV. "I'm going to get some rope and then we're gonna have a talk." I ducked inside, frantically searching for something to tie him up with. I found some nylon cord in one of the storage compartments and rushed back outside. But he was gone. A trail of blood led from where he'd fallen into the dark woods. I swore under my breath. I couldn't just let him go. He was injured, possibly dangerously so. And what if he came back? I grabbed my first aid kit, flashlight, and knife. Taking a deep breath to steel my nerves, I plunged into the forest following the blood trail. The woods were dense, the underbrush making progress slow and difficult. I kept my flashlight beam low, trying to stay as quiet as possible while scanning for any sign of movement. The blood trail was easy to follow at first. Bright red droplets stark against the forest floor, but as I pressed deeper into the woods, the trail began to thin out. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every snapping twig under my feet sounded like a gunshot in the quiet forest. I was hyper-aware of how vulnerable I was out here, jumping at every rustle in the undergrowth. After it felt like an eternity, I heard movement up ahead. I crouched down, inching forward until I could see a small clearing. The scruffy man was there, leaning heavily against a tree. He was struggling to bandage his wound with strips torn from his already tattered shirt. He looked up as I approached, his eyes wide with fear. "Stay back," he rasped, his voice weak and trembling. "I don't want any more trouble." I kept my distance, knife at the ready. "Then why did you attack me?" I commanded. "What do you want?" I thought you were one of them," he said, slumping further against the tree. "Please just let me go before they come back." "Who?" I pressed, taking a cautious step closer. "Who's coming?" Before he could answer, there was a sharp crack from the trees. I barely had time to react before a bullet whizzed past my ear, splintering the bark of a nearby tree. The scruffy man let out a strangled cry when still, a dark stain spreading across his chest. I dived to the ground, rolling behind a tree for cover. My heart was racing, my breath coming in short gasps. What the hell was happening? Who was out there shooting at us? I peered around the tree, scanning the darkness. I couldn't see the shooter, but I could hear footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. I needed to move in fast. Keeping low to the ground, I began to crawl through the underbrush, trying to make as little noise as possible. Whoever was out there, they were hunting us both. And I had no intention of being their next victim. I crawled through the forest, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give away my position. Twigs and rocks dug into my palms and knees, but I hardly noticed the discomfort. My entire being was focused on one thing: survival. The sound of footsteps had faded, but I didn't dare assume I was safe. I kept moving, using every bit of outdoor knowledge I'd accumulated over years of camping to stay as quiet and invisible as possible. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I saw a familiar shape looming in the darkness. My RV. I managed to circle back to my campsite. Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by a new wave of fear. The RV wasn't exactly Fort Knox, but it was better protection than being exposed in the woods. I made a final scan of my surroundings, then sprinted for the RV. I practically dove inside, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely manage the lock. Once inside, I allowed myself a moment to catch my breath. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The strange man, the attack, the shooting. What had I stumbled into? I needed a plan. First things first, weapons. I grabbed my hunting rifle from its case and loaded it. It wasn't much, but it made me feel a little less helpless. Next, communication. I tried my cell phone again, desperately hoping for even one bar of service. Nothing. The satellite phone I kept for emergencies was similarly useless. Whatever was blocking the signal out here was thorough. I positioned myself by the window, rifle at the ready, watching the tray line. Minutes dragged by like hours. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle of leaves sounded like approaching footsteps. My mind kept replaying the scruffy man's words. I thought you were one of them. One of who? Why were they killing people? A movement caught my eye, snapping me back to high alert. A figure was moving through the trees, heading straight for the RV. I raised my rifle, trying to steady my trembling hands. As the figure stepped into the clearing, I recognized him immediately. It was another camper I had seen earlier in the day, a guy named Ronan. He had been with his family, 2 kids, and a wife at a campsite not far from mine. We exchanged pleasant nods when I passed by on my way to the river. But now Ronan looked different. His clothes were torn and dirty, his face scratched and bleeding into his eyes. There was a haunted look in them that sent a chill down my spine. I kept the rifle trained on him as he approached. Ronan, I called out, stopped right there. He froze, hands raised. Owen? Oh, thank God, it's me. We need to talk. Talk about what? I demanded, not lowering the rifle. Why are you sneaking around out here in the middle of the night? There's no time to explain, he said, his voice urgent. Please, just let me in. They could be here any minute. Something in his voice made me hesitate. He was clearly terrified, and part of me wanted to trust him. But after everything that had happened, I couldn't afford to take any chances. Start talking, I said, keeping the rifle aimed at him. Who are these people? Why are they hunting us? Ronan glanced over his shoulder, then back at me. It's a long story, he said. Short version, we stumbled onto something we shouldn't have. Now they're cleaning up loose end. He paused, swallowing hard. That guy you saw earlier, he was one of us. But he turned on us, probably trying to save his own skin. I hesitated, then lowered the rifle slightly. So what do we do? First we need to get out of here, Ronan said. We won't stop until we're all dead. I nodded, opening the door just enough for him to slip inside. He quickly shut and locked it behind him. We need to move now, he said urgently. Is the RV ready to go? Yeah, but we can just drive blindly, I replied. There we go. There's a ranger station a few miles from here, Ronan said. If we can get there, we might be able to call for help. I didn't like it, but it was better than sitting here waiting to be picked off. I started the engine and we peeled out of the clearing, headlights cutting through the darkness. The RV bounced and swayed as I navigated the rough forest road. Ronan kept glancing back as if expecting to see our pursuers at any moment. The darkness outside seemed oppressive, closing in around us. What exactly did you stumble onto? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as I steered around a particularly deep pothole. Ronan was quiet for a moment, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Finally, he spoke. My kids found something while we were hiking. At first we thought it was just some old trash, a metal container half buried in the dirt. But when he opened it, he trailed off, shaking his head. What was in it? I pressed. The documents, photos, evidence of something big. Corporate logos, government seals, details of some kind of secret operation. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes haunted. We should have just left it alone, but I'm a journalist. I couldn't just walk away from a story like that. I felt a chill run down my spine. So you took it, Ronan nodded. I thought I was being careful. I made copies, hid the originals, but they must have been watching the area. Damn it, they came for us. Who are they? I asked. I don't know, Ronan admitted. Maybe mercenaries or some kind of secret government team. All I know is they're professionals and they're ruthless. We lapsed into tense silence, the only sound being the rumble of the RV's engine and the crunch of gravel under its tires. I tried to process what Ronan had told me. It sounded like something out of a conspiracy thriller, not the kind of thing that happens in real life. And yet, the terror in Ronan's eyes was very real. After what felt like hours, we saw lights in the distance, the ranger station. Grief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As we drew closer, I could see that something was wrong. The doors of the station were hanging open, and several windows were shattered. "Oh God," Ronan muttered. "We're too late." I parked the RV and grabbed my rifle. "Stay here," I told Ronan. "I'm gonna check it out." "Like hell," he replied, pulling out a small handgun I hadn't realized he was carrying. "We stick together." I nodded, and we cautiously approached the station. The interior was a mess, papers and supplies strewn everywhere, furniture overturned. But there was no sign of the rangers who should have been on duty. "There's a radio in the back," Ronan said. "If it's still working, we can call for help." We made our way to the back room where a large radio sat on a desk. Ronan fiddled with the dials, trying to get a signal. For a long moment there was nothing but static. Then suddenly a voice crackled through. "This is Ranger Station Alpha. Who's there?" "Thank God," Ronan breathed. "We need help. We're being hunted." There was a pause. Then the voice came back. "We know, stay where you are. Help is on the way." I exchanged a look with Ronan. "Do you trust them?" "I have." He shrugged helplessly. "Do we have a choice?" We barricaded ourselves in the back room, weapons at the ready. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Every creak of the building, every rustle outside had us on edge, unsure if it was our rescuers or our pursuers. Finally, we heard the sound of approaching vehicles. I peeked out the window and saw a convoy of black SUVs pulling up. Men in tactical gear poured out, surrounding the building. "Hold your fire," one of them shouted. "We're here to help." Ronan and I looked at each other, a silent question passing between us. After a moment, we lowered our weapons. Whatever was going on, these people were our best chance at survival. The men entered the station, moving quickly and efficiently to secure the area. One of them, a tall man with a stern expression, approached us. "I'm Agent Reardon," he said. "You're safe now." I wanted to believe him, but there were too many unanswered questions. "Who are you people?" I asked. "We're with a special task force," Reardon explained. "We've been tracking this group for a while. You're lucky to be alive." Ronan and I exchanged a look. "What happens now?" I asked. Reardon's smile was faint, almost apologetic. "How we get you out of here?" "You're coming with us." The ride out of the forest was tense. Reardon explained that the group hunting us was involved in a complex web of corporate and government corruption. He had been eliminating anyone who got too close to exposing their operation. As we drove away from the forest, I couldn't help but think about the scruffy man, the one who had attacked me. He was just another victim in this twisted game, and now Ronan and I were caught up in it too. We were taken to a safe house where we were debriefed and given new identities. They told us we would be safe, that the task force would handle everything. But as I lay in my new bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Somewhere out there, the people who had hunted us were still operating in the shadows. The documents Ronan had found were just the tip of the iceberg. How deep did this conspiracy go? And would we ever truly be safe? I didn't sleep much that night. And when the sun rose, I knew one thing for certain. My days of quiet camping trips were over. The wilderness I had once sought for solace now held too many secrets, too many dangers. From now on, I would keep to the safety of the known, the familiar, because sometimes the unknown is just too terrifying to face. But even as I tried to convince myself of this, a part of me knew that I couldn't just walk away. I had been drawn into something bigger than myself, a fight against corruption and darkness, and whether I liked it or not, I was now a part of it. As I watched the sunrise from the window of the safe house, I made a silent vow I would find out the truth, no matter the cost. Because in a world where the wilderness held such dangerous secrets, sometimes the only path to peace is through the heart of the storm.